Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, the place where curiosity slows down, explanations take their time, and science unfolds at a pace gentle enough to follow with half-closed eyes. Tonight, we're going to wander into a question that sounds simple at first, but becomes more intriguing the longer you sit with it. At some point in the distant past, humans stopped being just another species surviving on a dangerous planet, and became the species that reshaped that planet itself. It's easy to forget how unusual that really is. After all, the world we live in feels built for us. Roads stretch across continents, lights glow at night, food appears in markets, neatly arranged and labelled. Even the temperature of our homes bends to our wishes with a quiet turn of a dial. The planet can seem at times like something carefully arranged for human comfort. But of course, that is not how it began. For most of our history, humans were not powerful. We were not fast runners, not strong fighters, not heavily armoured. We had no claws, no venom, no thick fur, no wings. A thunderstorm could threaten us. A cold winter could starve us. A single predator in the dark could end a life in seconds. And yet, something changed. Somewhere along the long path of our past, there was a turning point. Not a single moment, not a sudden flash like a switch being flipped, but a shift, gradual and quiet at first, that eventually made humans the most influential species the Earth has ever known. Tonight, we're going to explore that turning point together, slowly, comfortably, step by step. But before we wander too far into the distant past, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps you're in a city apartment with distant traffic humming like a steady tide. Maybe you're in a quiet house where the only sound is the faint creak of settling wood or the soft rhythm of breathing in the room. It could be early evening where you are, or very late, the kind of hour when the world grows quieter and thoughts seem to drift more easily. And what time is it right now, in your little corner of the world? It's a fitting question, in a way, because the story of how humans came to dominate the Earth is also a story about time. Not hours or minutes, but thousands of years, tens of thousands. A slow unfolding shaped by countless small choices, accidents, discoveries, and adaptations. If you find this journey soothing or interesting, or simply a pleasant way to unwind at the end of the day, I'd be grateful if you gave the video a like or subscribe to the channel. It helps this quiet little space reach others who might enjoy drifting to sleep while wandering through science and history together. Now, settle in. Let your shoulders relax a little. There's no rush where we're going. Let's begin by imagining the world as it was long before cities, before farms, before roads or writing or metal tools. A world where humans lived as small groups scattered across vast landscapes, moving with the seasons, watching the skies, listening carefully to the sounds of wind and animals and distant water. Picture a night on the open plain tens of thousands of years ago. There are no electric lights, no glowing screens, no distant engines. The stars are bright enough to cast faint shadows. The air carries the smell of grass and earth. Somewhere far away a predator calls, and every human within earshot feels the quiet tension of listening, alert but still. In that world, survival was never guaranteed. A broken bone could be fatal. A drought could mean weeks of hunger. A harsh winter could wipe out entire groups. Humans were clever, certainly, and adaptable, but they were also vulnerable. If you had walked across the Earth during that time, you would not have pointed to humans and said, "There is the species that will dominate the planet." You might have noticed lions, whose strength and coordination made them formidable hunters, or elephants, whose size and intelligence allowed them to shape entire landscapes, or wolves, whose cooperation and endurance made them masters of pursuit. Humans, by comparison, might not have stood out at all, and yet something was already beginning to set us apart. Not in the obvious ways, not in speed or strength, but in subtler traits. the ability to share knowledge, the ability to imagine things that did not yet exist, the ability to cooperate in groups larger than most other animals ever could. At first, these advantages were small, easy to miss, but small advantages, given enough time, can change everything. It's a bit like watching a river carve a canyon. If you look at the river for a single minute, nothing seems to change. The water flows, the rocks remain, and the landscape appears still, but return after thousands of years, and the entire shape of the land is different. Human history, in its earlier stages, moved like that river, slowly, steadily, shaping the future in ways that no one living at the time could have fully understood. Another interesting thing to notice is that domination, as we think of it today, wasn't the goal. Early humans weren't trying to conquer the planet. They were trying to survive until tomorrow, to find food, to stay warm, to protect children, to avoid danger. The larger story emerged from countless small actions repeated over generations. A sharper tool here, a new way of sharing food there, a better method of tracking animals, a more reliable way to pass knowledge from elders to children. Each step on its own was modest. Together, they formed a path that led somewhere extraordinary. There's also something comforting in realizing how gradual this process was. It reminds us that enormous changes rarely happen overnight. They grow from patience, from persistence, from small improvements that accumulate over time. And as we follow this story, it helps to remember that the humans of those distant ages were not so different from us. They laughed, they worried, they cared for their families, they sat around fires, telling stories, looking up at the same stars we see today. In many ways, they were us, just living in a much harsher world. Now there's a detail about that ancient world that often surprises people. Humans were not always the hunters at the top of the food chain. In many places they were prey as often as predator. Large cats, hyenas, bears and other powerful animals saw humans not as masters of the landscape, but as another potential meal. A group of humans travelling at dusk had to remain alert, listening for the faintest sound in the grass or the snap of a twig in the darkness. This reality shaped our senses, our fears, even the way our brains respond to sudden noises. The instinct to startle, the quickened heartbeat in the dark, the sense of unease when hearing an unfamiliar sound at night, all of these are echoes of a time when staying alert meant staying alive. So the turning point we're exploring tonight was not just about gaining power. It was about moving from a world where humans were vulnerable to one where they gradually became less so. And that change did not come from becoming stronger or faster. It came from something else entirely. From learning, from sharing, from remembering. One of the most remarkable traits of our species is the ability to pass knowledge forward with incredible accuracy. Not just simple skills, but complex ideas, techniques and traditions. A tool invented by one person could be improved by the next generation, and improved again by the next. Over time, knowledge began to accumulate. This accumulation of knowledge is sometimes called cultural evolution, and it moves much faster than biological evolution. A genetic change might take thousands of years to spread. A useful idea can spread in a single lifetime, and that difference, small at first, became one of the key forces that changed everything. It's worth pausing for a moment to appreciate how unusual this is in the animal world. Many animals learn, some even teach their young, but very few build layer upon layer of shared knowledge across hundreds or thousands of generations. Humans do, and once that process began, the pace of change slowly began to increase. Not quickly, not dramatically, but enough that over thousands of years the differences became unmistakable. Groups that communicated better survived more often. Groups that cooperated more effectively hunted more successfully. Groups that shared knowledge more widely adapted more easily to new environments. Little by little, humans began to spread across grasslands, forests, deserts, and eventually into some of the harshest climates on Earth. And everywhere they went, they carried not just their bodies, but their ideas. Ideas turned out to be far more powerful than claws or teeth. But before we move further into how those ideas shape the world, it helps to linger just a little longer in that earlier time when the outcome was far from certain. Because understanding how fragile human survival once was makes the turning point all the more remarkable. Imagine waking before sunrise in a small group of early humans. The air is cool. The fire from the night before is reduced to faint glowing embers. Someone carefully feeds it small twigs, coaxing it back to life. Others stir, stretching, rubbing sleep from their eyes, listening to the sounds of the morning. Every day begins with uncertainty. Will there be food today? Will the weather hold? Will the group remain safe? There are no stored supplies, no supermarkets, no emergency services. Everything depends on skill, cooperation, and a bit of luck. And yet, within that uncertainty, something else is present. Curiosity, experimentation, the quiet, persistent human tendency to try new things, to observe, to learn. Those tendencies, almost invisible in a single lifetime, began to accumulate across generations. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance between humans and the rest of the natural world began to shift. Not all at once, not everywhere at the same time, but steadily enough that, given enough centuries, the change would become undeniable. Not so long ago, at least not on the scale of the planet, there was a time when humans were not builders of cities or travellers of oceans, not farmers, not engineers, not even the most successful hunters in many places. There was a time when humans were simply another species moving carefully through a world that was far larger, far harsher, and far less predictable than the one we know today. If you imagine that world for a moment, it helps to let go of everything familiar. No roads, no houses, no electricity, no machines humming quietly in the background. The landscape stretches wide and open, shaped only by wind, rain, ice, and the slow work of rivers. Forests are dense and dark in places. Grasslands roll for hundreds of kilometres. The air carries the scent of soil, leaves, and distant water. And moving through this landscape in small groups are humans. They are not yet farmers or citizens or travellers with maps. They are hunter-gatherers, relying entirely on what they can find, catch, or gather each day. Their lives are shaped by the rhythms of the seasons, the migrations of animals, and the slow turning of the sky from light to dark and back again. One of the first things to notice about these early humans is how physically ordinary they were compared to many animals around them. A human cannot outrun a deer. A human cannot overpower a bear. A human cannot see as sharply as an eagle or smell as keenly as a wolf. In raw physical terms, humans are not especially impressive creatures, and yet they survived. Survival in that world required awareness. It required listening carefully to the wind, noticing small movements in the grass, remembering the locations of water sources, and recognizing which plants were safe to eat and which could make you sick. Knowledge was not abstract or optional. It was the difference between life and death. A young human growing up in such a group would learn constantly which tracks belong to which animals, how to tell the weather by watching the sky, where to find roots or berries at different times of year, how to stay quiet when danger was near. These lessons were not written down. They were spoken, demonstrated, repeated, and remembered. But even with all that knowledge, life was fragile. Injury was a serious threat. A deep cut could become infected. A broken leg might never heal properly. Illness, which today might be treated with medicine, could sweep through a group with devastating effects. And then there were predators. It's easy to forget, living in a world of streetlights and secure buildings, that for most of human history the night belonged to other creatures. Large cats, hyenas, wolves, and bears move through the darkness with senses far sharper than ours. A human alone at night was vulnerable in a way that is difficult to imagine today. Even during the day, danger was never far away. A hunting trip could turn into a desperate retreat. A watering hole could be the territory of something larger and stronger. Early humans had to remain alert, not just occasionally but constantly. This constant awareness shaped the human mind. The quick reaction to sudden sounds, the instinct to scan unfamiliar environments, the subtle unease in darkness. All of these are echoes of a time when paying attention was essential. At the same time, humans were not helpless. They had advantages, though they were not always obvious. One of those advantages was endurance. Humans are not fast sprinters, but they are remarkably good at long-distance travel. Our bodies are adapted for walking and running over long distances, for sweating efficiently, for maintaining a steady pace under the sun. This allowed early humans to track animals over hours or even days, slowly wearing them down. Another advantage was cooperation. A single human is vulnerable. A group of humans working together becomes something different. Hunters could coordinate surrounding prey or driving it toward traps or difficult terrain. Gatherers could share information about where food was plentiful. Groups could defend themselves more effectively than any individual could alone. Still, cooperation alone did not make humans dominant. Many animals cooperate. Wolves hunt in packs. Lions coordinate attacks. Ants and bees build entire societies. What made humans different was not just cooperation, but the scale and flexibility of that cooperation. Humans could work together in groups that were larger and more loosely related than most other species could manage. Individuals who were not closely related could still share food, tools, and protection. Trust, even among strangers, was beginning to emerge as a powerful force. There's something quietly remarkable about that. Trust is not visible. It leaves no fossil record, but it changes everything. A group that trusts each other can share resources, divide labour, and support the injured or the elderly. That increases the chances that knowledge and skills are preserved and passed on. And knowledge, more than anything else, was becoming the true advantage of humans. Imagine sitting beside a small fire tens of thousands of years ago, listening as an elder explains how to shape a stone tool or how to track a particular animal. That knowledge might have taken years to learn, but once shared, it could benefit everyone. This is something many animals cannot do in the same way. A lion cannot explain to another lion how to hunt differently. A bird cannot teach complex new techniques generation after generation, but humans could. And that ability meant that each generation did not have to start from scratch. Over time, tools improved. Hunting techniques became more refined. Shelters became more effective. Clothing made from animal skins allowed humans to survive in colder climates. Little by little, humans began to spread into new environments. This spread was not a grand migration planned in advance. It happened gradually, over many generations. A group might follow a herd a little farther than usual. Another might settle near a new river. Children grew up in these new places, learned the landscape, adapted to it. And slowly, the range of humans expanded. It's important to remember that this expansion was not always easy. New environments brought new challenges, different climates, unfamiliar plants, new predators. Groups that failed to adapt did not survive. But the ones that did adapt carried their knowledge forward, adding new insights to what they already knew. Another factor that shaped early human life was the unpredictability of the environment itself. The Ice Age was not a single uniform period of cold. It was a time of fluctuating climates, advancing and retreating glaciers, shifting rainfall patterns, and changing ecosystems. Landscapes that were once forests could become grasslands. Rivers could change course. Animal populations could rise or collapse. For a species that depended directly on the land, these changes were profound. Humans had to be flexible. They had to adjust their diets, their movements, their tools. Groups that could adapt quickly had a better chance of surviving. This flexibility, this ability to change behavior in response to new conditions, was becoming one of the defining traits of our species. It's also worth noticing something else about early humans. They were social in a deeply emotional way. Archaeological evidence shows signs of care for injured individuals who survived long after they would have been able to hunt or gather on their own. This suggests that groups supported those who could no longer contribute in the usual ways. That kind of care is rare in the animal world. It requires empathy, patience, and a willingness to share resources even when times are difficult, and it strengthens the group as a whole. An injured hunter might later recover and teach valuable skills. An elder might no longer hunt but could pass on knowledge that improves survival for everyone. In this way, cooperation and compassion were not just moral traits, they were survival strategies. Yet despite all these advantages, humans were still far from dominating the Earth. They were one species among many, living within ecosystems shaped by climate, geography, and the long history of life on this planet. There were other human species too, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in parts of Asia, and possibly others we are only beginning to understand. These groups were not primitive caricatures. They were intelligent, skilled, and well adapted to their environments. For a long time, the future of humanity was uncertain. It was not clear which human species, if any, would survive in the long run, and yet one lineage did. Homo sapiens, our species, began to spread more widely than any human species before, across Africa, into the Middle East, across Asia, into Australia, and eventually into the Americas. This spread was not driven by conquest in the modern sense. It was driven by adaptability, curiosity, and the slow accumulation of knowledge. Another detail that often surprises people is how slowly this process unfolded. From the emergence of early Homo sapiens to the widespread dominance of humans across the planet took tens of thousands of years. Changes that seem dramatic when summarized in a book or a video were, in reality, almost invisible within a single lifetime. A person living 30,000 years ago would not have felt part of a great transformation. They would have felt the daily concerns of finding food, staying warm and caring for their family. And yet, step by step, those daily actions were shaping the future of the entire planet. There's something quietly humbling in that realization. The turning points of history are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are the result of countless small decisions made by ordinary people repeated over generations. As we move forward in this story, it becomes clearer that the true turning point was not a single invention or discovery. It was a combination of changes, each building on the others. Long before humans built cities or crossed oceans in ships, the planet itself was restless. The ground beneath our ancestors' feet felt solid enough, the mountains unmoving, the rivers steady in their courses, but on longer timescales the Earth was constantly changing. Ice advanced and retreated. Forests expanded and vanished. Rainfall shifted. Winds carried dust across continents. Lakes appeared where none had been before, then slowly dried away. For the small groups of humans living tens of thousands of years ago, these changes were not abstract scientific ideas. They were immediate realities. A valley that once held water might become dry. A familiar herd might migrate somewhere new and never return. Winters might grow longer, summers shorter, or storms more frequent. Survival depended on noticing these changes early and responding to them. Imagine waking one morning in a landscape that feels slightly different. The air is colder than usual. The ground is firmer underfoot, the soil beginning to freeze overnight. The animals that once grazed nearby are fewer now, moving farther each season. Nothing dramatic has happened, no sudden catastrophe. Just a slow shift, almost easy to ignore, except that food is becoming harder to find. For early humans, this kind of gradual change could shape entire lives. One of the most powerful forces shaping the human story during this time was the Ice Age, or more accurately, a series of ice ages. Vast sheets of ice spread across large parts of the northern hemisphere, locking away enormous amounts of water and lowering sea levels. Landscapes that are now underwater were once dry land. Other regions became colder and drier, transforming forests into open grasslands or barren plains. These changes did not happen everywhere at once, and they did not follow a smooth pattern. The climate shifted in pulses, sometimes warming for centuries, then cooling again. For animals and plants, adapting to these changes was difficult. For humans, it was both a challenge and in some ways an opportunity. When environments change, the species that survive are not always the strongest or the fastest. Often, they are the most flexible. Flexibility was becoming one of the defining traits of humans. A group that relied entirely on one type of food might struggle if that food disappeared. But a group that could hunt, gather, fish, and forage across different landscapes had more options. Humans were generalists. They could eat a wide variety of plants and animals, and that made them more resilient than many species that depended on a narrow diet. Still, flexibility alone was not enough. Adapting to a changing climate required observation and memory. It required noticing patterns, remembering which valleys held water during dry seasons, which animals migrated at certain times of year, which plants ripened earliest. Knowledge of the land became a form of protection, and this knowledge was shared. One person might notice a change, but a group could remember it. Over time, these shared observations formed a kind of collective memory, passed down through stories, demonstrations, and daily practice. Another effect of climate change was movement. As glaciers advanced or retreated, as rainfall patterns shifted, humans followed the resources they depended on. Groups moved slowly, generation by generation, sometimes travelling hundreds or even thousands of kilometres over centuries. This movement shaped the human story in profound ways. As humans entered new environments, they encountered unfamiliar challenges. Colder climates required better clothing and shelter. Dry regions demanded new ways of finding water. Forested areas required different hunting techniques than open plains. Each environment demanded new solutions, and each solution added to the growing pool of human knowledge. It's interesting to think about how different this process was from the way many animals adapt. Most species rely primarily on biological evolution. Over many generations, physical traits change, allowing better survival in a particular environment. But this process is slow, often taking thousands or millions of years. Humans, by contrast, began relying more and more on cultural evolution, adapting through ideas and behaviours rather than through physical changes alone. A warmer coat made from animal skins could allow survival in cold climates immediately, without waiting for thicker fur to evolve. A better shelter could protect against wind and rain without any change to the human body. In this way, the pace of human adaptation began to outstrip that of many other species. But adaptation was not always smooth or successful. There were times when climate changes were too rapid or too severe for some groups to cope with. Archaeological evidence suggests that populations of humans sometimes declined sharply, perhaps even disappearing entirely in certain regions. The human story is not just a story of survival, it is also a story of loss, of groups that struggled and failed, of knowledge that may have vanished with them. Yet overall, humans persisted. Another important factor in this period was competition. Humans were not the only intelligent hunters on the planet. Large predators, including lions, wolves, and hyenas, competed for many of the same animals. In some cases, humans may have scavenged from predator kills, carefully approaching carcasses after larger animals had fed, using tools to extract what remained. This required courage and caution. Approaching a predator's kill was dangerous, but it also provided valuable food. Over time, humans became more effective hunters themselves, developing strategies that relied on coordination and persistence. Climate changes also affected animal populations in complex ways. Some species thrived in colder conditions while others declined. Herds moved in response to shifting vegetation. Rivers froze or flooded at different times of year. For humans, staying aware of these patterns was essential. There's a quiet kind of intelligence in this kind of observation, a patience that comes from watching the land day after day, season after season. Early humans did not have written records or scientific instruments, but they had sharp senses and attentive minds. They learned by watching, and over time they became remarkably skilled at reading the landscape. Another pressure created by a changing planet was unpredictability. A reliable environment allows routines to form. An unpredictable one forces constant adjustment. Early humans had to be ready to change plans quickly, to move camp, to try new foods, to explore unfamiliar areas. This willingness to explore, to step into the unknown, became another advantage. Not every group would take that risk. Some might remain in familiar territory even as conditions worsened. Others would move, following distant mountains or rivers, venturing into landscapes no human had seen before. Those journeys were not always successful, but when they were, they expanded the range of our species. It's also worth remembering that climate change did not just affect food and water, it affected the social lives of humans as well. Groups that once lived near each other might be forced apart by changing conditions. Others might encounter each other for the first time as they moved into new territories. These encounters could lead to cooperation, exchange of knowledge, or sometimes conflict. But they also allowed ideas and techniques to spread. A new tool design discovered in one region could eventually appear hundreds of kilometers away, carried by travelers or shared through contact between groups. In this way, a changing planet did not just challenge humans, it connected them. Another subtle effect of environmental pressure was innovation. When resources are plentiful and conditions stable, there is less incentive to change. But when survival becomes uncertain, experimentation increases. People try new methods, new tools, new ways of doing things. Most experiments fail, but some succeed. And a successful idea can spread quickly, improving survival for many people. Over thousands of years, this process of trial and error began to reshape human behavior. Tools became more specialized, hunting techniques became more sophisticated, shelters became more effective at protecting against weather. Each improvement was small, but together they formed a powerful trend. There's something quietly remarkable about the way pressure shapes creativity. Challenges force attention, and attention often leads to insight. Early humans, facing the constant demands of a changing environment, were becoming increasingly inventive. An invention, once it begins to accumulate, becomes a powerful force. Another consequence of climate change was the development of stronger social bonds. In difficult conditions, cooperation becomes even more important. Sharing food, caring for the injured, and working together to build shelters or hunt large animals increased the chances of survival for everyone. Groups that cooperated effectively were more likely to endure. This may have shaped not only human behavior, but human psychology. Empathy, communication, and social awareness became valuable traits, reinforcing the bonds that held groups together. At the same time, environmental challenges may have influenced the way humans thought about the world. Watching the seasons change, observing patterns in animal migrations, noticing the cycles of plants and weather, all of these experiences encouraged a deeper awareness of time and cause and effect. Humans were not just reacting to their environment, they were beginning to understand it. This growing understanding allowed better planning. A group that knew when certain animals migrated could prepare in advance. A group that recognized the signs of approaching winter could store food or seek shelter in safer locations. Planning for the future, even in simple ways, was becoming part of human life, and planning is a powerful tool. It allows actions in the present to shape outcomes in the future, turning knowledge into survival. Another interesting detail about this period is that humans were not the only human species adapting to these changes. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly others were also responding to shifting climates and environments. Each group had its own strategies, its own strengths. For a long time, multiple human species coexisted on this planet. But over thousands of years, Homo sapiens gradually spread farther and adapted to a wider range of environments than any other human species. The reasons for this are still debated, but adaptability, social cooperation, and innovation likely played important roles. The pressure of a changing planet may have accelerated these traits, favouring groups that could learn quickly, share knowledge effectively, and adjust to new conditions. It's fascinating to think about how much of human history was shaped not by deliberate choices, but by the slow, persistent influence of climate and geography. The Earth itself was a powerful teacher, presenting challenges that forced our ancestors to grow more capable, more flexible, more observant. And in responding to those challenges, humans were slowly developing the qualities that would eventually allow them to reshape the planet in return. At some point, long before cities, before farming, before even the first permanent villages, humans began to do something no other species had ever mastered in quite the same way. They learned not just to fear fire or flee from it, but to keep it, carry it, and eventually create it. That shift sounds simple when we say it quickly. Fire is so familiar to us now that it hardly seems remarkable. A stove lights with the turn of a knob. A candle flickers quietly on a table. A campfire crackles while people talk and watch the flames. Fire feels ordinary, but for early humans, fire was extraordinary. It was power in its rawest visible form. It was light where there had been darkness, warmth where there had been cold, protection where there had been danger. And learning to use it changed everything. To understand why, it helps to imagine a world without fire. Nights were long and completely dark. Once the sun set, human vision became limited, and the world belonged to animals that could see or smell far better in the darkness. Cold could creep in quickly, especially in open landscapes or during harsh winters. Food, eaten raw, was tougher to chew, harder to digest, and sometimes dangerous to consume. Fire altered all of this at once. At first, humans probably encountered fire as a natural force. Lightning strikes ignited dry grass. Volcanic activity produced burning flows. Forest fires swept across landscapes, leaving behind blackened ground and the smell of smoke carried on the wind. For most animals, fire meant only danger, something to escape. But humans were different in one important way. They were curious. Curiosity can be a powerful thing. It leads to questions, to experimentation, to cautious approaches toward things that others avoid entirely. It's possible that early humans began by approaching the edges of burned areas after a fire passed, noticing that some animals had been killed, that some plants tasted different after being heated, that the warmth lingering in the ground felt comforting. Eventually, someone must have realized that embers could be carried. A burning branch could be preserved. A small flame could be fed with dry grass or twigs. This was not easy. Fire demands attention. It dies if neglected and spreads dangerously if uncontrolled. Keeping a fire alive required knowledge, patience, and cooperation. Someone had to gather fuel, someone had to watch the flames, someone had to learn how to protect it from wind or rain. And yet the benefits were so great that these efforts were worth it. One of the most immediate advantages of fire was warmth. In colder climates, this alone could mean survival. Nights that would otherwise be freezing became bearable. Groups could sleep more comfortably, conserving energy that would otherwise be spent simply trying to stay warm. Fire also provided light. This may seem like a small thing, but the ability to extend the day changed human life in subtle but profound ways. Activities that once had to end at sunset could continue. Tools could be repaired, food could be prepared, stories could be told, and storytelling, though it may not seem directly related to survival, plays an important role in human societies. Stories carry knowledge, values, and shared memories. Around a fire, people could share experiences, teach younger members of the group, and strengthen social bonds. In this way, fire may have shaped not just human survival, but human culture. Another important effect of fire was protection. Many predators are wary of flames and smoke. A fire at the edge of a campsite could deter animals that might otherwise approach during the night. This allowed humans to rest more securely, reducing the constant need for vigilance. Better rest, in turn, improved health, decision-making and cooperation. But perhaps the most transformative effect of fire came from something even more fundamental: food. Cooking changes food in remarkable ways. Heat breaks down tough fibres in plants and meat, making them easier to chew and digest. It kills many parasites and harmful bacteria. It releases more calories, allowing the body to extract more energy from the same amount of food. This increase in available energy had far-reaching consequences. The human brain is an energy-hungry organ. It consumes a large portion of the body's calories. A diet that provides more easily digestible energy can support the growth and maintenance of a larger brain. Some scientists believe that the control of fire and the widespread use of cooking played a key role in the evolution of the human brain. Cooking reduced the need for large teeth and powerful jaws, allowing changes in the structure of the skull. It also shortened the time needed to chew and digest food, freeing time and energy for other activities. In other words, fire may have helped shape the human body itself. It's fascinating to think about how a simple technological innovation, controlling fire, could influence anatomy, behaviour, and social life all at once. Another effect of fire was the expansion of human habitats. Cold regions that were once uninhabitable became accessible. Humans could survive in places where winter temperatures would otherwise have been lethal. Fire allowed the drying of clothing, the heating of shelters, and the melting of snow for water. With fire, the map of possible human environments grew larger. Fire also changed landscapes. Humans began to use controlled burns to clear vegetation, encourage the growth of certain plants, or drive animals during hunts. This was one of the earliest ways humans began to shape ecosystems deliberately, rather than simply adapting to them. It was a small step toward the much larger transformations that would come later. There's also a social aspect of fire that is easy to overlook. Gathering around a fire naturally brings people together. The warmth and light create a shared space, a place where conversation and cooperation happen more easily. Anthropologists sometimes suggest that the habit of sitting together in the evening, talking and sharing experiences, may have strengthened language and social bonds. Around a fire, faces are visible, gestures are clear, and attention is focused inward on the group rather than outward on immediate survival tasks. This may have been one of the earliest environments in which complex communication flourished. Another subtle change brought by fire was the regulation of daily rhythms. Before fire, human activity was closely tied to daylight. With fire, evenings became longer. Wakefulness extended into the night. Social and cognitive activities had more time to develop. This may have influenced sleep patterns, social structures, and even the development of rituals or traditions associated with nighttime gatherings. At the same time, controlling fire required responsibility. A neglected fire could spread, destroying vegetation or shelters. Learning to manage fire safely was an important skill, one that had to be taught and remembered. This again reinforced the importance of shared knowledge. It's worth pausing to consider how unusual it is, in the animal world, for a species to control a powerful natural force. Many animals use tools in simple ways, but fire is different. It is dynamic, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. Managing it requires planning, cooperation, and foresight. These are all traits that were becoming increasingly central to human life. There's also a symbolic dimension to fire that likely emerged over time. Fire is mesmerizing. The movement of flames captures attention. The warmth and light create a sense of safety and comfort. Even today, people find it relaxing to watch a fireplace or a campfire, to sit quietly and observe the slow dance of burning wood. This deep emotional response may have roots stretching back tens of thousands of years, to evenings when fire meant survival, warmth, and companionship. Another interesting detail is how fire influenced diet beyond cooking meat. Many plant foods that are difficult or impossible to eat raw become edible when cooked. Tubers, roots, and certain seeds can be softened and made more nutritious through heating. This expanded the range of available foods, making humans even more adaptable. Adaptability once again was becoming the key to survival. As generations passed, the use of fire became more sophisticated. Humans learned to create fire rather than simply preserving natural flames. Techniques such as striking stones to produce sparks or using friction to generate heat allowed fire to be started when needed. This was a major step. It meant that fire was no longer a rare or unpredictable resource. It could be produced deliberately, reliably, and once a technology becomes reliable, it becomes woven into daily life. Fire was no longer an occasional advantage, it was a constant presence. This constancy changed human expectations. Warmth, cooked food, and protection from darkness became normal. Life without fire would have seemed increasingly difficult. It's interesting to think about how quickly a new technology can shift what feels normal. What was once extraordinary becomes ordinary, and what was once normal becomes unimaginable. For early humans, fire marked one of the first moments when they began to move beyond simply adapting to the environment and started actively reshaping it. It was not domination, not yet, but it was the beginning of control, and control, once achieved in one area, often leads to new possibilities in others. The mastery of fire did not instantly make humans the dominant species on Earth. Many challenges remained. Climate continued to change. Predators remained dangerous. Food was never guaranteed. But fire provided tools, energy, and opportunities that no other species possessed in the same way, and those advantages began to accumulate. Consider for a moment how much time a typical animal spends eating. Grazing animals may chew for most of the day. Predators, after a successful hunt, tear, chew, and digest tough meat over long hours. Even many primates, our distant relatives, spend a large portion of their waking lives chewing fibrous plants or raw foods that require constant effort to break down. Now imagine the first time early humans began eating food that had been softened by heat, food that required less chewing, less effort to digest, and yielded more energy for the body. That shift may have seemed small at first, almost unremarkable, just another advantage of sitting beside a fire. But over many generations, it became one of the most important changes in human history. Cooking does something remarkable to food. Heat breaks down tough fibers, gelatinizes starches, and denatures proteins. In simple terms, it makes nutrients easier for the body to access. Calories that would otherwise pass through undigested become available. Food that might be difficult or even dangerous to eat raw becomes safe and nourishing. This increase in available energy had consequences that reached far beyond the evening meal. The human brain, as it turns out, is an extraordinarily expensive organ. Although it accounts for only a small percentage of our body weight, it consumes a large portion of our daily energy. Maintaining a brain of this size requires a steady and substantial supply of calories. For early humans relying on raw foods alone, meeting those energy demands would have been difficult. Chewing raw roots, raw meat, and fibrous plants requires time and effort, and even then the body cannot extract all the available nutrients. Cooking changed that balance. Food prepared with fire delivered more usable energy in less time. That meant fewer hours spent chewing and digesting, and more energy available for growth, activity, and most importantly, brain development. Over thousands of years, this change may have contributed to the gradual expansion of the human brain. Larger brains allowed for more complex thinking, better memory, improved planning, and more sophisticated communication. These abilities, in turn, improved hunting strategies, social organization, and the transmission of knowledge. It became a feedback loop. Better tools and cooperation allowed better access to food. Cooking made that food more efficient as fuel. More energy supported larger brains. Larger brains enabled better tools, better cooperation, and better planning. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the advantages began to compound. Another effect of cooking was a change in the structure of the human body itself. Compared to earlier human ancestors and to many other primates, modern humans have smaller teeth and jaws and shorter digestive tracts. These changes make sense in a world where food is softer and easier to digest. A large digestive system is useful for processing tough, raw plant material. But if food is cooked, the digestive process becomes more efficient, and a smaller gut can do the same work. The energy saved by maintaining a smaller digestive system can be redirected elsewhere, including to the brain. This trade-off, less energy spent on digestion and more on thinking, may have been one of the key biological shifts that set humans apart. It's fascinating to think that something as simple as heating food could influence anatomy, cognition, and the trajectory of an entire species. There's also a social dimension to cooking that is easy to overlook. Preparing food with fire takes time and often involves cooperation. Someone gathers fuel, someone prepares the food, others watch the fire or keep it burning steadily. These shared tasks encourage communication and coordination. Meals become communal events, times when people gather, talk, and strengthen social bonds. In many ways, the habit of eating together may have deep roots in this period of human history. The evening meal around a fire was not just about nutrition, it was about connection, about sharing experiences, about reinforcing the bonds that held groups together. Stronger social bonds improve survival. Groups that worked well together could hunt more effectively, share resources more fairly, and care for vulnerable members. And once again, small advantages began to accumulate. Cooking also expanded the range of edible foods. Many plants contain toxins or compounds that are harmful when eaten raw, but become safe when cooked. Others are simply too tough or fibrous to chew effectively without heat. With fire, early humans could access new food sources that were unavailable to other animals. This dietary flexibility made it easier to survive in a variety of environments. A group moving into a new region might encounter unfamiliar plants or animals. If some of those foods could be made edible through cooking, the chances of survival increased. Adaptability, once again, was reinforced. Another subtle change brought by cooking was the reduction of disease. Heat kills many pathogens and parasites that can be present in raw meat or contaminated food. Fewer illnesses meant higher survival rates, especially for children, who are often the most vulnerable to foodborne diseases. Over generations, this improvement in health would have contributed to population growth and stability. It's interesting to notice how many of these changes were indirect. Cooking did not instantly transform humans into dominant creatures. Instead, it created conditions that allowed other changes to occur: larger brains, stronger social groups, improved health, and greater adaptability. Each of these factors reinforced the others. There's also a quieter, more subtle effect of cooking that relates to time. Raw food often requires long periods of chewing. Cooking reduces that time significantly. Less time spent chewing means more time available for other activities, making tools, planning hunts, teaching children, or simply interacting with others. Time, once freed from the demands of constant eating, became a resource that could be used in new ways, and when a species gains time, it gains opportunities. Another detail worth considering is how cooking may have influenced the development of language. Gathering around a fire to prepare and eat food creates a natural setting for conversation. Faces are visible in the firelight. Hands are free. Attention is focused on the group rather than on immediate survival tasks. These conditions are ideal for communication. While language likely developed gradually over a long period, the social environment created by cooking and shared meals may have accelerated its growth. More complex language allowed for more precise teaching, better coordination, and richer storytelling. And storytelling in turn preserved knowledge and strengthened group identity. There is something deeply human about sitting together, sharing food and talking. That pattern may have begun not as a cultural tradition, but as a practical necessity, and over time it became a defining feature of human life. Cooking also influenced daily rhythms. With a reliable source of warmth and light, evenings became more active. People could remain awake longer, engaging in social and cognitive activities after sunset. This extension of the day provided additional time for learning, planning, and strengthening social ties. It's easy to overlook how significant that extra time might have been. An additional hour or two each evening, multiplied across years and generations, represents an enormous increase in opportunities for communication and innovation. Gradually, these changes reshaped not just individual lives, but entire communities. Another important point is that cooking requires foresight. Food must be gathered in advance, fuel must be collected, fires must be maintained. These tasks encourage planning and organisation, skills that would later become essential in more complex societies. Planning for a meal may seem simple, but it represents a step toward planning for larger goals, storing food, preparing for seasonal changes, organising group activities. Step by step, the cognitive and social abilities that would eventually support agriculture, cities and civilizations were being strengthened. There's also an emotional aspect to consider. Warm food, shared in a safe place, creates a sense of comfort and security. This feeling may have reduced stress and improved overall well-being, allowing people to think more clearly and cooperate more effectively. A species that feels safe enough to think, to plan, to imagine, gains an advantage over one that must remain in constant fear. And that sense of safety, however fragile, was often built around a fire. Over many thousands of years, the practice of cooking became so deeply integrated into human life that it is difficult to imagine living without it. Even today, cooking remains one of the most universal human activities, practiced in every culture, in every part of the world. It connects us to our past in a quiet, everyday way. When you prepare a meal, when you heat food, when you gather with others to eat, you are participating in a tradition that stretches back tens of thousands of years, and that tradition helps shape the human brain, the human body, and the human way of life. But increased brain size and improved nutrition were only part of the transformation. A larger brain provides potential, but potential alone does not guarantee success. What mattered just as much was how humans began to use that potential. Long before writing, long before symbols carved into stone or ink pressed onto paper, humans began to develop something far more powerful than any tool they had yet created. They began to speak in ways that carried meaning beyond the immediate moment. Sounds were no longer just warnings or calls. They became shared ideas, memories, plans, and stories. At first, communication among early humans was probably not very different from that of other social animals. Gestures, facial expressions, and simple vocal sounds could signal danger, call others to food, or maintain social bonds. Many animals do this. Wolves communicate within their packs. Birds use calls to warn of predators. Primates gesture and vocalize to maintain group cohesion. But at some point, human communication began to change. The difference was subtle in the beginning, almost impossible to notice within a single generation. Sounds became more varied. Meanings became more precise. Instead of merely signaling that a predator was nearby, a sound might begin to distinguish what kind of predator, how many, and where it had been seen. Precision is powerful. The more accurately information can be shared, the more effectively a group can respond. Imagine a hunting party returning to camp. Without complex language, they might only be able to gesture or make simple sounds indicating success or failure. But with more developed communication, they could describe where animals were seen, what the terrain was like, how the herd moved, and what strategy might work the next day. Information that once died with experience could now be preserved in words, and once ideas can be preserved, they can also be improved. Language allowed knowledge to accumulate in a way that was far more efficient than imitation alone. A skilled toolmaker could explain not just how to shape a stone, but why certain techniques worked better than others. A tracker could describe patterns in animal movement that might not be obvious to a beginner. This ability to share abstract ideas was a turning point. Many animals can learn by watching, but very few can explain. Humans gradually became able to do both. There is also something important to notice about language that is easy to overlook. Language allows us to talk about things that are not present. A person can describe a place far away, an event that happened days ago, or a plan for something that has not yet occurred. This ability to discuss the past and the future expands the range of human thinking enormously. A group that can plan tomorrow's hunt in detail has a better chance of success than one that can only react in the moment. A group that can remember and share the lessons of past mistakes avoids repeating them. Memory, when stored in language, becomes a collective resource. Another fascinating aspect of language is how it strengthens cooperation. Large groups require coordination. Individuals must know their roles, understand expectations, and trust that others will do the same. Language makes this coordination possible. A hunt involving many people can be organised with spoken instructions. A campsite can be arranged with shared understanding. Resources can be divided more fairly when needs and intentions are clearly communicated. Over time, groups that communicated effectively would have had a significant advantage over those that did not. It is also likely that language influenced the structure of human thought itself. Words allow us to categorize, to compare, to imagine possibilities. When we have words for concepts, we can think about them more clearly and manipulate them in our minds. Language is not just a tool for communication, it is also a tool for thinking. The development of language was probably gradual, evolving over many thousands of years. There was no single moment when humans suddenly began speaking as we do today. Instead, communication became more complex step by step, each generation adding small improvements. Children played a crucial role in this process. Young minds are remarkably good at learning and adapting language. Subtle changes in pronunciation, grammar, or vocabulary can spread quickly among children and then become part of the language of the entire group. In this way, language evolves continuously, shaped by the people who use it. Another important feature of language is storytelling. Stories are more than entertainment. They're a way of organising knowledge, preserving experiences and transmitting values. A story about a dangerous river crossing can warn future generations. A story about a successful hunt can teach effective strategies. Stories about cooperation and fairness can reinforce social norms. Because stories are memorable, they can carry complex information across long periods of time. Around a fire in the quiet hours of evening, stories would have been shared again and again, refined, expanded, and remembered. These stories connected individuals to their group and their past, strengthening identity and continuity. Language also made it possible to teach skills more efficiently. Demonstration alone can show how to perform a task, but explanation can reveal the reasoning behind it. A learner who understands why a technique works can adapt it to new situations. This flexibility is essential in a changing environment. Another effect of language was the expansion of social networks. Individuals could maintain relationships with more people because communication allowed for negotiation, reconciliation, and shared planning. Groups could grow larger and more complex, and larger groups brought new advantages: more hunters, more gatherers, more knowledge, more protection. But they also brought challenges, conflicts, misunderstandings, and competition for resources. Language helped manage these challenges. Disputes could be resolved through discussion rather than violence. Agreements could be formed. Rules could be explained and remembered. Over time, spoken language became one of the foundations of social organisation. It is also interesting to consider how language may have influenced empathy. Words allow us to describe feelings, to express pain, joy, fear, or hope. When someone can explain their experience, others can understand it more clearly. Understanding strengthens social bonds. Groups in which individuals cared for one another were more likely to survive. Injured members could be supported. Children could be protected. Knowledge could be preserved through the lives of elders. Language helps make these connections stronger. Another remarkable feature of language is its ability to create shared mental worlds. When people talk about something, an animal, a place, an idea, they begin to imagine it together. These shared images allow groups to coordinate in ways that would otherwise be impossible. A hunting party can imagine a strategy before attempting it. A group can plan a journey to a place none of them has seen but which has been described by others. Ideas begin to travel farther than bodies. This ability to transmit ideas across distance and time is one of the most powerful traits of our species. It also allowed innovation to spread rapidly. A new tool design invented in one group could be described to another. A successful hunting technique could be taught and adopted elsewhere. Knowledge was no longer confined to the person who discovered it. It became a shared inheritance. There is also a deeper implication of language that is worth considering. Language allows us to imagine things that do not exist. Not just plans or memories, but possibilities, spirits, symbols, explanations of the world. This ability to imagine may have been one of the earliest steps toward the development of culture, belief systems, and eventually complex societies. But even in its earliest forms, language was already changing the human experience. Silence, once the dominant condition of human nights, was gradually replaced by conversation. Camps were no longer just places to sleep, but places to exchange ideas. Knowledge accumulated not only in tools and habits, but in words. And words, unlike tools, can travel almost instantly from one mind to another. This is a remarkable form of power, not power over nature in the physical sense, but power over information. A group that knows more, plans better, and communicates clearly has a profound advantage. Another subtle consequence of language was the strengthening of memory. When experiences are described and retold, they become more deeply embedded in the mind. Repetition reinforces learning. Collective memory becomes more reliable than individual memory alone. Over time, this collective memory formed the basis of traditions, practices, and shared identities. Groups were no longer just collections of individuals, they were communities bound by shared stories and knowledge. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly when language reached the level of complexity that truly set humans apart. The process left few direct traces. Words do not fossilize. Grammar leaves no imprint in stone, but the evidence is indirect yet compelling. The increasing complexity of tools, the spread of humans into diverse environments, the emergence of symbolic objects and art all suggest that communication had reached a level capable of supporting these developments. And once language reached that level, the pace of human cultural evolution accelerated. New ideas could be shared quickly, mistakes could be avoided, successes could be repeated and refined. The advantages of cooperation, already significant, became even greater when supported by language. Gradually, the balance between humans and the rest of the natural world began to shift further. Humans were still vulnerable in many ways, but they were becoming more organized, more knowledgeable, more adaptable. And adaptation, as we have seen, was the key to survival in a changing world. But language alone was not enough. At first glance, cooperation in small groups seems natural. Many animals live and work together in families or packs. Wolves hunt in coordinated groups. Meerkats take turns standing watch. Primates groom one another, share food, and defend their territory collectively. In these cases, cooperation is often based on close relationships. Individuals help those they know well, those they have grown up with, those who share their genes. Early humans certainly cooperated in similar ways. Small bands of relatives and close companions worked together to gather food, protect children, and watch for danger. But something began to change as human communication improved and social bonds deepened. Cooperation expanded beyond immediate family. It began to include larger groups, individuals who were not closely related, and eventually people who had never even met before. That shift may not sound dramatic, but it was one of the most powerful developments in human history. To understand why, it helps to imagine the limits of cooperation in most species. A wolf pack rarely includes strangers. An ant colony cooperates at an enormous scale, but the behaviour is driven largely by instinct and genetic programming. Humans, by contrast, began to cooperate in flexible, adaptable ways that depended on shared understanding rather than instinct alone. This flexibility made all the difference. Picture a group of early humans preparing for a large hunt. Tracking a single small animal might require only 1 or 2 people, but hunting large game, animals capable of defending themselves, required coordination. Some individuals might drive the animal toward a narrow pass, others might wait in ambush, still others might be prepared to finish the hunt or transport the meat back to camp. This kind of coordinated effort requires trust. Each person must believe that the others will play their part. Without trust, the group would hesitate, and hesitation could mean failure or even injury. Trust is a fragile thing, but once established it becomes incredibly powerful. It allows individuals to take risks, knowing that others will support them. It allows resources to be shared, even when one person has little to offer in return at that moment. Sharing food, for example, is a form of cooperation that strengthens groups. A successful hunter may not need all the meat from a single animal. By sharing, they ensure that others will do the same when fortune shifts. Over time, this system of mutual support reduces the risk of starvation for everyone. This kind of cooperation depends on memory and reputation. Individuals remember who has shared and who has not. Those who consistently refuse to cooperate may find themselves excluded, a serious consequence in a world where survival depends on the group. In this way, cooperation is reinforced not just by kindness, but by practical necessity. Another factor that encouraged cooperation was the difficulty of many essential tasks. Building shelters, caring for children, maintaining fires, and preparing food all required effort. Working together made these tasks easier and more efficient. Groups that cooperated effectively could accomplish more with less energy. As human groups grew slightly larger, new challenges emerged. More individuals meant more potential conflicts. Disagreements over resources, responsibilities, or relationships could threaten the stability of the group. Language helped address these challenges. Problems could be discussed, compromises reached, and rules established. Social norms began to form, expectations about how individuals should behave toward one another. These norms, though unwritten, became powerful forces. They guided behavior, reduced conflict, and made cooperation more predictable. Over time, humans developed a remarkable ability to cooperate not only with people they knew personally, but with strangers who shared certain beliefs, customs, or goals. This ability to form large, flexible social networks was unusual in the animal world. One reason this was possible is that humans began to use shared symbols and stories to create a sense of belonging. A group might share myths, rituals, or traditions that reinforced their identity. These shared elements created bonds that extended beyond immediate personal relationships. A person who had never met another member of the group could still trust them to some degree, simply because they belonged to the same community. This expansion of trust was a turning point. It allowed cooperation to scale up from small bands of a few dozen individuals to large communities capable of undertaking more complex activities. Larger groups brought advantages. More people meant more knowledge, more skills, more protection, and greater ability to respond to challenges. But larger groups also required better organisation. Roles began to emerge. Some individuals became particularly skilled hunters. Others specialised in making tools, preparing food, or caring for children. Division of labour increased efficiency, allowing each person to focus on what they did best. Specialisation is another powerful force in human societies. When individuals develop expertise, the group as a whole benefits. A skilled toolmaker can produce better tools than someone who practices only occasionally. A knowledgeable tracker can guide hunts more effectively than someone with less experience. And as skills become more specialised, cooperation becomes even more essential. Each person depends on the contributions of others. This interdependence strengthens social bonds. Another interesting aspect of human cooperation is empathy. Humans are capable of understanding the emotions of others, of recognizing pain, fear, or joy. This emotional awareness encourages helping behavior, even when there is no immediate personal gain. Caring for the injured or the elderly is one example. In many animal species, individuals who can no longer contribute are left behind. But archaeological evidence shows that early humans sometimes cared for injured individuals for long periods, even when those individuals could not hunt or gather. This kind of care requires patience, compassion, and a long-term perspective. It suggests that early humans valued group members not only for their immediate contributions, but for their relationships and knowledge. And knowledge once again was a crucial resource. Elders, even if physically weaker, often possessed valuable experience. They remembered migration routes, seasonal patterns, and survival strategies. Preserving that knowledge benefited the entire group. Cooperation, therefore, was not just about sharing food or labour. It was about preserving information and ensuring continuity across generations. Another factor that encouraged cooperation was the unpredictability of life. A hunter might succeed one day and fail the next. A gatherer might find abundant food one season and very little the next. By pooling resources and supporting one another, groups reduce the impact of individual misfortune. This system of shared risk and shared reward made survival more stable. It also encouraged fairness. Groups that distributed resources equitably were more likely to maintain harmony and cooperation. Extreme inequality could lead to resentment, conflict, or fragmentation. While early human societies were not perfectly equal, many hunter-gatherer groups appear to have practiced relatively balanced sharing, especially compared to later agricultural societies. This balance helped maintain social cohesion. Cooperation also extended beyond immediate survival tasks. Groups developed rituals, dances, and communal activities that reinforced unity. These shared experiences strengthened bonds and created a sense of belonging. Belonging is a powerful motivator. Individuals who feel connected to a group are more willing to contribute, to take risks, and to support others. Over time, these social and emotional bonds became one of the strongest advantages of our species. There is another dimension of cooperation that deserves attention: communication across generations. Parents teach children, elders teach young adults. Skills and knowledge are passed down, refined, and expanded. This continuity allows improvements to accumulate. A technique discovered by one generation can be improved by the next, and improved again by the next. This cumulative culture is rare in the animal kingdom, and it depends heavily on cooperation. It is also worth noting that cooperation does not eliminate competition. Groups sometimes competed with one another for territory or resources, but within each group, cooperation remained essential. Balancing cooperation within groups and competition between groups may have shaped human behavior in complex ways, encouraging loyalty, communication, and shared identity. As cooperation expanded, so did the scale of human activity. Larger hunts became possible, camps became more organized, knowledge spread more widely, and gradually the foundations were laid for even more complex forms of cooperation that would emerge later: agriculture, trade, cities, and civilizations. But at this stage in the story, cooperation was still rooted in daily survival, in the practical tasks of finding food, caring for children, and protecting one another. It was not yet the vast networks of cooperation that define the modern world, but it was the beginning of that process. A species that can cooperate effectively gains an extraordinary advantage. It can solve problems that no individual could solve alone. It can adapt to changing conditions more quickly. It can share knowledge, distribute resources, and coordinate actions across large groups. And once cooperation reaches a certain scale, it begins to unlock possibilities that were previously unimaginable. If you were to pick up a well-made tool and examine it closely, even a simple one, you might notice something interesting. It carries knowledge within it. The shape of the edge, the balance of the weight, the way it fits into the hand, none of these details are accidental. Each one reflects lessons learned, sometimes over generations. In a quiet way, tools remember. For early humans, this was a profound development. Until tools began to take on more refined forms, most knowledge had to live entirely in the mind. Skills were demonstrated, copied, practiced, and gradually improved. But once a tool was shaped in a particular way, the knowledge of how to make it effective became embedded in its design. A well-crafted spear point or cutting blade could silently teach anyone who examined it carefully. This changed the way information moved through human groups. Instead of relying only on memory and speech, knowledge could now be preserved in objects. A young learner could hold a tool made by someone long gone and, by studying it, begin to understand the technique behind it. The tool itself became a kind of teacher. It is difficult to overstate how important this was. In the natural world, most animals rely almost entirely on instinct or direct imitation. A bird learns to build a nest by watching others and through trial and error. But the nest does not preserve the full story of how to build it. Each generation begins again, repeating much of the same learning process. Humans began to escape that cycle. A stone hand axe shaped with care could last for years. A technique for shaping the axe could be passed on, refined, improved, and standardized. Over many generations, tools became more effective, more specialized, and more varied. This process is sometimes called cumulative culture, the gradual building of knowledge in layers, each generation adding something new, and tools were one of the main ways those layers were preserved. Imagine an early human shaping a stone blade. The process requires patience and skill. A stone must be selected carefully, struck at precise angles, flaked in controlled ways. A mistake can ruin hours of work, but when the blade is finished, it is not just an object. It is the result of understanding how stone fractures, how edges cut, how hands move. All of that understanding is frozen into the shape of the tool. Someone else, picking up that blade, can feel its balance, see its sharpness, and learn from it. The tool becomes a physical record of knowledge. Another important aspect of tools is that they extend the body. A spear extends the reach of the arm. A cutting blade sharpens the teeth of the hand. A digging stick strengthens the fingers and nails. With tools, humans could do things their bodies alone could not. This extension of physical ability allowed humans to hunt more effectively, process food more efficiently, and shape their environment in ways that would otherwise have been impossible. Over time, tools became increasingly diverse. Different shapes for different purposes, scrapers for hides, points for spears, awls for piercing. Each new design solved a specific problem. Problem solving itself was becoming more sophisticated. A group facing a new challenge could experiment, testing different approaches, observing what worked and what did not. Successful designs spread. Unsuccessful ones were abandoned, and slowly technology began to emerge. It is interesting to notice that early technology did not require metal, machines, or complex materials. Technology, at its simplest, is just the application of knowledge to solve practical problems. A shaped stone, a woven net, a carefully constructed shelter, all of these are technologies, and each one represents a step toward greater control over the environment. Another effect of tools was the increase in efficiency. A sharp blade can process an animal much faster than teeth alone. A spear allows hunting from a safer distance. A container made from bark or woven fibers allows food or water to be carried more easily. Efficiency saves energy, and energy can be used elsewhere. Less time spent struggling with basic tasks means more time for learning, planning, and cooperation. Just as cooking freed time once spent chewing, tools freed time once spent struggling against physical limitations. Time, once again, became a resource. There is also something deeply human about making tools. It requires imagination. Before a tool exists, someone must picture it, must imagine the shape that will solve a problem. That ability to picture something that does not yet exist is a powerful cognitive skill. It connects closely with language and planning, abilities that were developing alongside tool use. Another fascinating aspect of tools is how they encourage teaching. Making a tool often requires steps that are not obvious to a beginner. An experienced toolmaker might guide a learner's hands, demonstrate techniques, explain mistakes. This process strengthens communication and social bonds, and teaching itself is a remarkable behaviour. It requires patience, awareness of another person's understanding, and a willingness to invest time in someone else's learning. These qualities reinforce cooperation and empathy within the group. Tools also encouraged foresight. A spear must be made before a hunt, not during it. A shelter must be built before the storm arrives. Materials must be gathered in advance, stored and prepared. Planning for the future became a routine part of life. The more humans practiced planning, the better they became at it, and better planning improved survival. Over many generations, tools began to shape not only human behaviour, but human bodies. Hands adapted to fine motor control. Brains adapted to complex coordination and problem solving. Vision and attention became finely tuned to detail. The relationship between tools and the human body became a partnership, each influencing the other. Another important point is that tools allowed humans to occupy environments that would otherwise have been inaccessible. Clothing made from animal hides protected against cold, shelters shielded against wind and rain. Tools for fishing opened new food sources along rivers and coasts. Each new environment brought new challenges, and each challenge inspired new tools. Adaptability, once again, was reinforced. There is also an emotional dimension to tools that is easy to overlook. A well-made tool represents effort and skill. It carries the memory of the person who made it, the time spent shaping it, the purpose it was intended to serve. In some archaeological sites, tools appear to have been carefully repaired or maintained, suggesting that they were valued, not treated as disposable objects. This sense of value may have strengthened the habit of caring for possessions, planning for long-term use and preserving resources. Another subtle change brought by tools was the growing separation between humans and immediate physical limits. Without tools, a human is constrained by the strength of their muscles and the sharpness of their teeth. With tools, those limits expand. A spear can bring down an animal larger than any individual human could overpower. A cutting blade can process materials that would otherwise be impossible to handle. This expansion of capability began to change how humans saw themselves. They were no longer just creatures reacting to their environment. They were problem solvers shaping it. It is worth remembering, though, that this process was slow. The improvements in tools over thousands of years may seem subtle when viewed generation by generation. A slightly sharper edge, a more balanced shaft, a more efficient way of attaching a stone point to a wooden handle. But small improvements accumulate. Over time, those small changes lead to large differences. Another interesting development was the sharing of tools and techniques between groups. When different human communities encountered one another, they sometimes exchanged knowledge. A new design could spread across large regions over generations. This exchange accelerated innovation. Ideas no longer developed in isolation. They travelled, merged, and evolved. The growing network of shared knowledge began to connect human populations in ways that had never existed before. There is also something remarkable about how tools change the way people think. When you use a tool regularly, it begins to feel like part of your body. A skilled hunter holding a spear does not think consciously about the spear as a separate object. The movement of the arm and the movement of the spear become one coordinated action. In a sense, the boundary of the body expands to include the tool. This psychological extension of the self is still present today. A musician feels an instrument as part of their expression. A writer feels a pen or keyboard as part of their thought process. A driver senses the width of a vehicle almost as if it were part of their own body. This ability to incorporate tools into our sense of self may have deep evolutionary roots. Another effect of tools was the growing ability to shape the environment deliberately. Digging tools could alter the land. Cutting tools could clear vegetation. Structures could be built to provide shelter or store food. These were small steps, but they mark the beginning of a larger trend, humans moving from adapting to environments toward modifying them. This shift would eventually lead to agriculture, cities and industries, but its earliest forms were simple and practical. A cleared campsite, a reinforced shelter, a shaped path through dense vegetation. Even these modest changes had lasting effects. It is also worth considering how tools influence social status within groups. Individuals who were particularly skilled at making or using tools may have been respected or sought after. Their knowledge became valuable, and preserving it became important for the group. Respect for skill encouraged learning and innovation. Another fascinating detail is how tools influence childhood. Young humans, growing up in groups that use tools, would have spent time observing, practicing, and gradually mastering these skills. Play may have included imitation of adult tasks, shaping small stones, practicing throwing, experimenting with materials. Learning through play is a powerful method of acquiring complex skills, and the longer childhood of humans compared to many animals may have provided the time needed to master increasingly sophisticated techniques. As tools became more advanced, the amount of knowledge required to survive increased. This made teaching and learning even more essential. Knowledge, tools, language, and cooperation were all reinforcing one another. A species that shares knowledge effectively, communicates clearly, cooperates widely, and preserves information in tools gains an extraordinary advantage. Long before laws were written, before borders were drawn on maps, before cities rose or monuments were built, humans began to organize themselves around something that could not be seen or touched. These were not tools, not weapons, not shelters, but shared ideas. Stories, beliefs, and explanations about how the world worked, who belonged, and what mattered began to shape human life in ways that were subtle at first, and then increasingly powerful. To understand why this mattered so much, it helps to think about the limits of cooperation without shared beliefs. A small group can cooperate because everyone knows everyone else personally. Trust is built through direct experience. But once a group grows beyond a certain size, personal relationships alone are no longer enough. You cannot personally know hundreds of people, let alone thousands. And yet humans eventually learn to cooperate in groups far larger than that. One of the reasons this became possible is that stories and shared beliefs created a sense of connection between people who had never met. A story about ancestors, a belief about the meaning of certain rituals, or a shared explanation of how the world came to be could bind individuals together into something larger than a family or a small band. This kind of shared understanding acts like an invisible thread. It does not physically hold people together, but it shapes their expectations, their behavior, and their sense of belonging. Imagine sitting with a group of early humans as evening settles in and the fire burns steadily. The day's tasks are finished. Food has been eaten. Darkness stretches beyond the circle of light. This is the time when conversation becomes more reflective, when experiences are shared, and when stories are told. Some stories might be practical, accounts of a hunt, a dangerous encounter, or a distant water source. Others might be more imaginative, explanations of why the seasons change, why the stars move across the sky, or why certain animals behave the way they do. These stories serve several purposes at once. They pass on knowledge, they entertain, they reinforce group identity, and they help make sense of a world that can often feel unpredictable. Humans have a deep need to understand their surroundings, to find patterns and causes. When something cannot be explained directly, stories provide a way to fill the gap. A storm is no longer just wind and rain. It becomes part of a larger narrative about forces, intentions, or cycles. Even if these explanations are not scientifically accurate, they provide something important: a sense of order. Order reduces anxiety. A world that seems governed by understandable patterns feels less frightening than one that appears random. Another important function of stories is teaching. A well-told story can communicate complex lessons in a memorable way. A tale about someone who ignored warnings and faced danger can encourage caution. A story about cooperation leading to success can reinforce the value of working together. Because stories are engaging, they are easier to remember than simple instructions. The human mind is particularly good at remembering narratives, sequences of events with characters and outcomes. This makes stories powerful tools for preserving knowledge across generations. There is also a social dimension to storytelling. When people listen to a story together, they share an experience. They laugh at the same moments, feel tension at the same points, and reflect on the same lessons. This shared emotional experience strengthens bonds within the group. Bonding is essential for cooperation. The stronger the bonds, the more willing individuals are to support one another. Over time, some stories became more than just entertainment or teaching tools. They became myths, narratives that explained the origins of a group, the meaning of natural events, or the rules by which people should live. Myths often include symbols and rituals, actions that reinforce belief through repetition. Lighting a fire in a certain way, performing a dance, or observing particular customs can strengthen the sense of belonging and continuity. Rituals also have a calming effect. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates comfort. In a world where many things are uncertain, rituals provide stability. Another effect of shared beliefs is the creation of social norms. These are the unwritten rules that guide behaviour, expectations about fairness, sharing, honesty, and responsibility. Norms reduce conflict by making behaviour more predictable. If everyone in a group agrees, even implicitly, that food should be shared in certain ways, disputes become less frequent. If everyone understands that certain actions are unacceptable, cooperation becomes easier. Norms, like stories, are passed down through teaching and observation. Children learn not only from what they are told, but from what they see others do. Over generations, these shared understandings become deeply embedded in culture. Culture, in this sense, is the collection of behaviours, beliefs, and knowledge that define a group. It shapes how people think, how they interact, and how they respond to challenges. And culture, once established, becomes a powerful force in human life. It is worth noticing that culture allows humans to adapt to environments in ways that go beyond biology or tools alone. Different groups living in different environments develop distinct ways of living, hunting, gathering, and organising themselves. These differences are not genetic, they are learned. And because they are learned, they can change relatively quickly. Another remarkable feature of shared beliefs is their ability to coordinate large groups. When individuals believe in the same rules or values, they can cooperate without needing to negotiate every detail each time. This efficiency allows larger and more complex societies to function. For example, if a group shares a belief about respecting certain leaders or elders, decisions can be made more quickly. If people believe in the importance of contributing to communal tasks, work can be organised more effectively. Belief, in this way, becomes a form of social technology. It shapes behaviour without the need for constant enforcement. There is also an emotional dimension to shared beliefs that should not be overlooked. Belonging to a group that shares stories and traditions provides a sense of identity. People know who they are, where they come from, and how they fit into the larger whole. Identity provides stability. It helps individuals face uncertainty with greater confidence. At the same time, shared beliefs can inspire cooperation on a scale that would otherwise be impossible. Individuals may be willing to make sacrifices for the good of the group, trusting that others will do the same. This willingness to act for a collective purpose is one of the foundations of human societies. Another important development associated with stories and myths is the emergence of symbolic thinking. Symbols allow complex ideas to be represented in simple forms: a mark, an image, a gesture. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans created symbolic objects, carvings, cave paintings, and ornaments. These objects may have carried meanings understood within the group, representing beliefs, stories, or identities. Symbolic thinking expands the range of communication. A symbol can carry meaning across time and distance, much like a tool carries knowledge in its shape. And just as tools preserve practical knowledge, symbols preserve cultural knowledge. There is also a connection between storytelling and imagination. The ability to imagine situations that have not yet occurred allows humans to plan, to anticipate challenges, and to invent solutions. A hunting strategy can be discussed before it is attempted. A journey can be planned in advance. A new tool can be designed in the mind before it is built. Imagination, supported by language and storytelling, becomes a powerful problem-solving tool. Another subtle effect of shared beliefs is the reduction of internal conflict within groups. When people agree on values and expectations, there is less need for constant negotiation. Cooperation becomes smoother, more automatic. Of course, disagreements still occur, but shared frameworks make resolution easier. It is also important to recognize that shared beliefs do not have to be factually accurate to be effective. What matters is that they are widely accepted within the group. A belief that encourages cooperation, fairness, or mutual support can strengthen a community regardless of its literal truth. This may explain why myths and traditions are found in every human culture. They serve practical social functions, even when their origins are symbolic or imaginative. Over many generations, the accumulation of stories, rituals, and shared beliefs created increasingly complex cultures. These cultures allowed humans to cooperate in larger groups, coordinate activities more effectively, and preserve knowledge more reliably. And as groups grew larger and more organized, new possibilities emerged. Trade, for example, becomes easier when people share rules about exchange and fairness. Alliances become possible when groups share beliefs or values. Large-scale projects, building shelters, organizing hunts, or managing resources become achievable when many individuals work together toward a common goal. All of these developments depend in part on shared understanding. It is interesting to think about how invisible this force is. Tools can be seen and touched, fire can be felt, but beliefs exist only in minds and in the interactions between people, and yet they shape the world in powerful ways. Even today, much of human society depends on shared beliefs, trust in systems, confidence in agreements, acceptance of social rules. These things are intangible, but they guide behavior on a massive scale. The roots of this capacity stretch back to those early evenings around fires, when stories were told and retold, when children listened and learned, when shared understanding began to form. Another aspect worth considering is how shared beliefs influence long-term thinking. When people feel connected to a group that existed before them and will continue after them, they are more likely to act with the future in mind. This sense of continuity encourages planning, preservation of resources, and investment in the well-being of future generations. Planning for the future is one of the defining traits of our species, and shared beliefs make long-term planning possible on a collective scale. Gradually, as stories became more elaborate and beliefs more structured, the foundations were laid for even more complex social systems. Traditions became institutions. Leaders emerged. Rules became more formal. But at this stage of the story, these developments were still simple, rooted in small communities and shared experiences. The important change was already underway. Humans were no longer cooperating only because they knew each other personally. They were cooperating because they shared ideas, values, and narratives that connected them. This ability to unite around shared beliefs would eventually allow humans to build villages, cities, and civilizations. Thousands of years passed with humans living as hunters and gatherers, moving with the seasons, following animals, and gathering what the land provided naturally. For most of that time, the idea of staying in one place for years, even generations, would have seemed strange, perhaps even risky. Movement was safety. Movement allowed people to follow food, to leave areas when resources ran low, and to avoid dangers that might linger in a single location. Yet gradually, in different parts of the world, a new way of living began to take shape. It did not appear suddenly, and it was not invented in a single place. Instead, it emerged slowly, through observation, patience, and a long series of small experiments that, at first, may not even have seemed important. People began to notice something about plants. Seeds dropped near campsites sometimes sprouted the following season. Areas where edible plants had grown before often produced them again. Certain patches of land, when cleared or disturbed, seemed to encourage new growth. These observations were not discoveries in the modern sense, but quiet realizations, repeated across generations. If seeds grew into plants and plants produced food, then perhaps the land itself could be guided. At first, this guidance was subtle. People may have scattered seeds near camps or protected useful plants from being trampled. They may have returned to the same areas year after year, gradually encouraging the growth of certain species. This was not farming as we imagine it today. It was a gentle beginning, a shift from purely gathering what existed to influencing what would grow. Over time, these practices became more deliberate. Some groups began planting seeds intentionally. Others learned to prepare the soil, clearing competing vegetation or loosening the ground to encourage growth. They observed which seeds produced the best results, saving them for future planting. This process required patience. A seed planted today would not produce food immediately. It required weeks or months to grow, and during that time, it had to be protected from animals, weather, and disease. Planning for the future, which had already begun to develop in hunting and tool-making, now became even more important. Agriculture demands foresight. It requires investing effort now in the hope of a reward later. It requires staying in one place long enough to care for crops and harvest them. This shift from immediate returns to delayed rewards changed the rhythm of human life. Instead of moving constantly in search of food, people began to stay longer in certain locations. Camps became more permanent. Shelters became sturdier. Storage methods developed to keep harvested food safe from pests and moisture. Food storage, in particular, was a major step forward. Surplus food meant that not every day depended on the success of a hunt or the availability of wild plants. Periods of scarcity could be managed more effectively. Stability began to replace constant uncertainty. This stability had profound effects on human societies. When food became more reliable, populations began to grow. More children survived to adulthood. Groups became larger. Larger groups required more organization, more cooperation, and more complex social structures. At the same time, agriculture changed the relationship between humans and the land. Hunter-gatherers adapt to the environment, moving when conditions change. Farmers adapt the environment to their needs. Fields are cleared. Irrigation channels are dug. Soil is prepared. Plants are selected and cultivated. For the first time, humans began to reshape entire landscapes deliberately. This transformation did not happen quickly. Early farming was labor-intensive and often less efficient than hunting and gathering in terms of time and nutrition. Many early farmers worked long hours and faced new challenges: crop failures, soil depletion, and vulnerability to drought or flooding. Agriculture was not an immediate improvement in every way, but it had one enormous advantage. It could support larger populations in a smaller area. A field of cultivated grain could produce far more calories per hectare than wild plants. This advantage gradually shifted the balance. As populations grew, staying in one place became more practical. Villages formed. Paths between settlements became more established. Trade began to develop, with groups exchanging food, tools, and materials. Trade, in turn, encouraged specialization. Not everyone needed to farm. Some people could focus on making tools, building shelters, or developing new techniques. Specialization increased efficiency and encouraged innovation. The foundations of more complex societies were beginning to form. Another important aspect of agriculture was the domestication of plants and animals. Over generations, humans began selecting plants with desirable traits, larger seeds, sweeter fruits, or higher yields. Animals that were easier to manage or more useful for food, labour or materials were bred selectively. This process of domestication changed species themselves. Wild grasses became wheat and rice. Wolves gradually became dogs. Wild cattle became livestock. Humans were not only reshaping landscapes, they were reshaping other forms of life. This was a powerful development. Domesticated animals provided meat, milk, hides, and labour. They could pull loads, plough fields, and transport goods. Plants provided reliable food sources that could be harvested and stored. The range of human capabilities expanded once again. Yet agriculture also brought new challenges. Living in permanent settlements increased the risk of disease. Waste accumulated. Close contact with domesticated animals allowed new illnesses to spread. Diets based heavily on a few staple crops sometimes led to nutritional deficiencies. Life as a farmer was not necessarily easier than life as a hunter-gatherer. In some ways, it was harder, but the long-term effects were undeniable. Permanent settlements allowed the development of new technologies. Pottery, for example, became more common because fragile containers could be used safely when people were not constantly moving. Storage vessels allowed surplus food to be preserved more effectively. Architecture began to develop. Shelters became more complex, built to last for years rather than weeks. Walls, roofs, and communal structures appeared, reflecting new forms of organisation and cooperation. Another important change was the concept of territory. Hunter-gatherer groups often moved across large areas, but farmers depended on specific plots of land. Protecting those fields became essential. This led to new forms of social organisation and sometimes conflict. Groups defended their resources and negotiated boundaries. Ownership in various forms began to emerge. With ownership came new social structures. Leaders, organisers, and decision-makers became more prominent. Systems for distributing resources, resolving disputes, and organising labour became more formal. The seeds of governance were being planted, along with the crops. There is also something deeply significant about the psychological shift brought by agriculture. When people plant seeds and watch them grow, they develop a different sense of time. The cycle of seasons becomes central. The future becomes something to plan for months or years in advance. Patience becomes a necessary skill. This long-term perspective influences not only farming but many other aspects of life: construction, planning, and cooperation. Agriculture also strengthened the role of shared beliefs and rituals. Planting and harvest cycles were often accompanied by ceremonies or traditions, reinforcing community bonds and marking the passage of time. These rituals helped coordinate large groups and provided a sense of continuity. Another subtle but important effect of agriculture was the creation of surplus. When food production exceeds immediate needs, resources can be stored, traded, or used to support individuals who are not directly involved in food production. Surplus allows societies to grow more complex. Artisans, traders, builders, and leaders can emerge. Knowledge can expand in new directions. The pace of change begins to accelerate. It is worth reflecting on how gradual this transformation was. Agriculture did not replace hunting and gathering overnight. For thousands of years, many groups combined both methods, farming in some seasons and hunting or gathering in others. Change came step by step. But once the agricultural way of life became established, its consequences were far-reaching. Landscapes were cleared, forests were cut, rivers were redirected. The visible imprint of human activity on the planet began to grow. This was one of the earliest stages of humans becoming a dominant force in shaping the Earth, not through sudden conquest, but through steady, cumulative change. Fields replaced wild vegetation, villages replaced temporary camps, paths became roads, storage pits became granaries. Each change was small, but together they transformed the relationship between humans and the natural world. And as settlements grew into larger communities, new challenges and opportunities appeared. Managing resources, organising labour, and preserving information became increasingly important. As farming communities grew larger and more stable, a quiet but significant change began to unfold. Settlements that had once been small clusters of huts or shelters slowly expanded. A place that might once have held a few families began to hold dozens, then hundreds. Over generations, some of these settlements grew into something entirely new. Places where large numbers of people lived together permanently, relying not only on the land around them, but on one another in increasingly complex ways. These were the first cities. At first, the word city might bring to mind tall buildings, crowded streets, and glowing lights at night. But the earliest cities were very different. They were often made of mud brick or stone, built close together for protection and efficiency. Narrow paths wound between homes. Storage areas held grain and supplies. Central spaces might be used for gatherings, trade, or rituals. What made these places remarkable was not their appearance, but their organisation. Living in a large settlement requires coordination. Food must be produced and distributed. Water must be managed. Disputes must be resolved. Tasks must be assigned. The larger the population, the more essential organisation becomes. This need for organisation led to one of the most important developments in human history, the creation of systems to manage information. In small groups, memory and conversation were enough to keep track of resources and relationships, but in larger communities, memory alone was no longer reliable. When hundreds or thousands of people are involved, information must be recorded in a more permanent way. And so, writing began to emerge. Writing did not appear all at once as full language written on paper. Its earliest forms were simple marks, symbols used to record quantities of grain, livestock, or goods. These marks allowed people to keep track of what was stored, what was traded, and what was owed. At first, these symbols were practical tools, much like early accounting records. But over time, they grew more sophisticated. Symbols began to represent sounds, words, and eventually entire ideas. For the first time in history, knowledge could be preserved in a form that did not depend on memory or oral tradition alone. This changed everything. A message written in clay or carved in stone could last for years, even centuries. Instructions, agreements, and laws could be recorded and referred to later. Knowledge could accumulate in a new way, building layer upon layer without being lost. Writing extended the reach of the human mind across time. It is difficult to imagine the significance of this change. Before writing, knowledge lived in stories, in memories, in the minds of individuals. When a person died, some of that knowledge died with them. After writing, ideas could outlive their creators. Civilization, in many ways, became possible because of this ability to preserve information. Cities also encouraged specialization on a scale that had not been possible before. In a farming village, most people still worked directly with food production. But in a city, some individuals could devote themselves entirely to other tasks: building, crafting, trading, organizing, or recording information. Specialization increases efficiency and innovation. A person who spends all their time refining a craft becomes highly skilled. A group of skilled individuals working together can produce tools, structures, and systems far more advanced than those created by generalists. Over time, this led to remarkable achievements: architecture, irrigation systems, roads, and early forms of engineering. Another development that emerged alongside cities was trade on a larger scale. Surplus food and specialized goods could be exchanged not just within a community, but between distant regions. Trade routes formed, connecting cultures and spreading ideas. Ideas travel with goods. A new tool design, a new farming technique, or a new method of construction could move from one society to another, accelerating the pace of innovation. Cities became centres of exchange, not only of materials but of knowledge. As societies grew more complex, systems of leadership also evolved. Decisions affecting large populations required coordination and authority. Leaders, councils, or governing bodies emerged to organise labour, manage resources, and resolve disputes. These early forms of governance were not always fair or stable, but they represented another step in the scaling of human cooperation. Rules became more formal. Laws were written. Systems of justice developed, sometimes imperfectly, but with the goal of maintaining order in increasingly large communities. Order, once maintained through personal relationships and shared norms, was now supported by institutions. Institutions are structures that persist beyond individuals. They allow societies to function even as generations change. There is also an emotional aspect to living in a city that is worth considering. In a small group, everyone knows everyone else. In a city, many people are strangers. Shared identity becomes more important, reinforced through language, traditions, and shared beliefs. Rituals and ceremonies often played a central role in early cities, bringing large groups together and strengthening social cohesion. Large structures, temples, gathering places, or monuments were sometimes built not only for practical purposes, but to symbolize shared identity and purpose. These structures required cooperation on an unprecedented scale, hundreds or thousands of people working together over long periods to achieve a common goal. This level of coordination would have been impossible without language, shared beliefs, and systems of organization. Another important change brought by cities was the concept of time itself. Agricultural societies already followed seasonal cycles, but cities introduced more precise scheduling of work, trade, and administration. Calendars and record-keeping became increasingly important. Time, once measured primarily by natural rhythms, began to be measured in more structured ways. This allowed societies to plan more effectively, coordinating activities across large populations. Cities also became centres of learning. Knowledge accumulated not only in written records, but in the minds of scholars, artisans, and administrators. Schools in early forms began to appear, places where specialised knowledge could be taught systematically. Education allowed skills to be transmitted more efficiently and consistently. As knowledge accumulated, new fields of understanding emerged: mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering in their earliest forms. It is remarkable to think that these developments began with simple marks on clay tablets used to count grain. Another consequence of organised societies was the development of infrastructure. Irrigation systems brought water to fields, roads connected settlements, storage facilities preserved food, defensive walls protected populations. These large-scale projects required planning, labour, and coordination on a scale never before seen in human history, and they changed landscapes permanently. Where once there had been open fields or forests, there were now canals, walls, and buildings. The visible imprint of human activity on the earth continued to grow. Yet life in early cities was not always easy. Crowded conditions could lead to disease. Food supplies could be threatened by drought or conflict. Social hierarchies sometimes created inequality and tension. But despite these challenges, cities continued to grow. The advantages of organisation, specialisation, and shared knowledge were powerful forces. Another subtle but important effect of writing and organised societies was the strengthening of long-term planning. When records exist, patterns can be observed over years or decades. Harvest yields can be compared. Flood cycles can be studied. Decisions can be based on accumulated data rather than short-term memory alone. Planning for the future became more precise. This ability to plan and organise on a large scale was one of the key reasons humans were becoming increasingly dominant. Dominance did not come from physical strength or speed. It came from coordination, communication, and the ability to shape environments deliberately over long periods. Cities were living examples of this power. They represented the combined effort of thousands of individuals, guided by shared systems of knowledge and organisation. It is also interesting to consider how cities change the human experience. Life in a city is different from life in a small group. There are more interactions, more opportunities, more challenges. People encounter ideas and cultures different from their own. Innovation often accelerates in such environments. Creativity thrives where people and ideas meet. And cities, by bringing large numbers of people together, created conditions for rapid cultural and technological change. Over centuries, these changes would lead to the rise of complex civilizations, vast trade networks, and technological advancements that transform the world. But even at this stage, the foundations were already in place. Language allowed communication, cooperation allowed large groups to function, tools extended physical abilities, stories and beliefs created shared identity. Agriculture provided stability and surplus. Writing preserved knowledge. Each development built upon the others. Long after the first seeds were planted and the first settlements began to grow, another quiet transformation was unfolding, one that changed not only human societies, but the lives of countless other species. This change did not happen suddenly, and it was not planned in any formal sense. It emerged gradually through observation, patience, and a long series of small choices repeated over generations. Humans began to shape other living creatures in ways that no species had ever done before. At first, the relationship between humans and animals was simple. Animals were hunted for meat, hides, and bones. Plants were gathered when they were found. The natural world provided what it could, and humans adapted to what was available. But over time, certain patterns began to emerge. Some animals lingered near human camps, feeding on scraps or drawn by the warmth and safety of human presence. Some plants grew especially well in disturbed soil near settlements. These small interactions became the starting point of domestication. One of the earliest examples of this process likely involved wolves. Imagine a group of humans living at the edge of a campfire's light, with food scraps discarded nearby. Wolves, cautious but curious, might approach from a distance, drawn by the scent of meat. The boldest among them, or perhaps the least fearful, might linger a little closer, keeping their distance but returning again and again. Over time, the wolves that were less aggressive and more tolerant of human presence had a slight advantage. They could access food more easily. Humans, in turn, may have noticed that these animals acted as early warning systems, alerting them to approaching predators or strangers. A mutually beneficial relationship began to form. Generations passed, and the wolves that lived near humans gradually changed. The most aggressive individuals were less likely to survive in close proximity to people. The calmer, more adaptable ones were more likely to remain. Slowly, almost invisibly, wolves began to become something else. They became dogs. This transformation was not immediate. It unfolded over thousands of years. Physical traits changed gradually: smaller size, varied coat colours, different skull shapes. Behavioural traits changed as well. Dogs became more attentive to human gestures and expressions, more willing to cooperate, more comfortable living alongside people. The domestication of dogs was one of the earliest examples of humans reshaping another species, and it had profound effects on both sides. Dogs assisted in hunting, guarded camps, and provided companionship. Humans provided food, shelter, and protection. This partnership strengthened human groups and expanded their capabilities. Animals were not the only organisms affected by domestication. Plants were changing as well. Consider what happens when people repeatedly gather seeds from the plants with the largest grains or the sweetest fruits. Those seeds are planted again, and the next generation of plants carries those desirable traits. Over many generations, wild plants begin to change. Grains become larger and easier to harvest. Fruits become sweeter. plants that once scattered their seeds naturally begin to depend on humans for reproduction. Wheat, rice, maize, and many other crops we rely on today are the result of this long process of selection. Domestication is, in essence, evolution guided by human choices. It is important to remember that early farmers did not understand genetics. They did not know about DNA or inheritance in the scientific sense. They simply observed which plants and animals were most useful and encouraged those traits. Observation, patience, and repetition were enough. Another important development in domestication was the management of herd animals. Goats, sheep, cattle, and pigs began to be kept and bred by humans. These animals provided meat, milk, hides, and labour. They could be moved, traded, and counted as valuable resources. Herding changed the relationship between humans and animals from one of pursuit to one of stewardship. Caring for animals required new skills. Herds had to be protected from predators. Grazing had to be managed to prevent overuse of land. Breeding had to be controlled to maintain desirable traits. This required planning and organisation. It also required empathy and observation. A herder who understands the behaviour of animals can guide them more effectively. Recognising signs of illness or stress improves the survival of the herd. Over time, humans became highly skilled at reading the behaviour of domesticated animals. This skill deepened the connection between species. Another consequence of domestication was the expansion of human mobility. Animals such as horses, camels, and later oxen allowed humans to travel farther and carry heavier loads. Trade routes expanded. Communication between distant regions became easier. The world, in a sense, began to feel smaller. Domesticated animals also transformed agriculture. Oxen and other draft animals could pull ploughs, allowing fields to be cultivated more efficiently. Larger areas could be farmed. Food production increased, and with increased food production came larger populations. The cycle of growth and expansion continued. It is also worth considering the unintended consequences of domestication. Living in close contact with animals increased the spread of diseases. Many human illnesses, such as influenza and certain bacterial infections, originated in animals and crossed into human populations. This close relationship between species brought both benefits and risks. Another subtle effect of domestication was the way it changed landscapes. Grazing animals altered vegetation patterns. Fields replaced wild ecosystems. Irrigation changed the flow of water. Human influence on the environment was becoming more visible and more widespread. There is something remarkable about how gradual this transformation was. No one woke up one morning and decided to domesticate plants and animals on a global scale. Each step was small, a plant chosen here, an animal kept there, a technique refined over years. But small steps, repeated over thousands of years, can reshape the world. Domestication also influenced social structures. Ownership of animals or land became a source of wealth and status. Trade in livestock and crops created new forms of economy. Communities became more interconnected. At the same time, domesticated animals and cultivated plants allowed humans to settle permanently in many regions, strengthening the development of villages and cities. Another interesting aspect of domestication is how it changed human perception of time. Raising crops and animals requires patience. Growth takes weeks, months, or years. Success depends on long-term care and planning. This long-term perspective became deeply embedded in agricultural societies. It shaped calendars, traditions, and rituals tied to planting and harvest cycles. There is also an emotional dimension to domestication. Animals kept by humans often became more than just resources. Dogs, in particular, formed close bonds with people. Even livestock, raised and cared for daily, became familiar presences in human life. These relationships influenced culture, stories, and beliefs. Over time, domesticated species became so integrated into human societies that it is difficult to imagine life without them. Crops provide the majority of our food. Animals contribute to agriculture, transportation, and companionship. The human story became intertwined with the stories of many other species. Another important point is that domestication required knowledge of breeding, feeding, seasons, and animal behaviour. This knowledge was passed down through generations, refined and expanded. Knowledge once again was the key to progress, and as knowledge accumulated, the pace of change accelerated. It is fascinating to think that the animals and plants around us today are in many ways living records of this history. Each domesticated species carries traces of the long relationship between humans and the natural world. They are evidence of a turning point, when humans began not only to adapt to their environment, but to shape other living beings to meet their needs. This ability to reshape life itself marked a new level of influence. Standing at the edge of a quiet shoreline, watching the movement of birds above the water or listening to the distant calls of animals in the night, it becomes clear that intelligence is not unique to humans. Many species solve problems, remember past events, communicate with one another, and even use tools. Crows bend twigs into hooks to retrieve insects. Dolphins cooperate to herd fish. Elephants recognize individuals and appear to mourn their dead. Chimpanzees shape sticks to gather termites and stones to crack nuts. If intelligence exists in so many forms, then an interesting question begins to form. Why did humans become the species that reshaped the planet, while other intelligent animals did not? The answer is not simple, and it does not rest on a single trait. Intelligence alone, as powerful as it is, does not guarantee dominance. Many species possess sharp minds, but their abilities are shaped by limits, physical, social, or environmental, that prevent their knowledge from accumulating in the same way human knowledge does. One of the most important differences lies in how knowledge is shared. Consider a crow learning to use a tool. It may discover through trial and error how to retrieve food using a twig. Other crows nearby might observe and imitate the behaviour. But this process is often limited. The details of the discovery are not explained in words. The learning depends heavily on direct observation, and the technique may not be refined or improved in a systematic way across generations. Humans, by contrast, develop the ability to teach deliberately. A skilled person can guide another step by step, explaining not only how something is done, but why. This allows complex skills to be transmitted more reliably and improved over time. Cumulative learning, the steady building of knowledge from one generation to the next, is one of the key forces that set humans apart. Another difference involves the scale of cooperation. Many intelligent animals cooperate within small groups, families, packs, pods, or troops. These groups are often limited in size because cooperation depends on direct social bonds. Trust is built through familiarity, and maintaining that trust becomes more difficult as groups grow larger. Humans developed the ability to cooperate in much larger groups, often with individuals they had never met personally. Shared language, stories, and social norms made this possible. A person could trust another member of the same community because they shared the same rules, beliefs, or identity. This expansion of cooperation allowed humans to organize large projects, build settlements, and manage resources on a scale far beyond that of other species. Physical limitations also play a role. Some intelligent animals live in environments that restrict the development of technology. Dolphins, for example, are highly intelligent, but they live in water. Fire cannot be controlled underwater, and many forms of tool use are difficult in that environment. Without the ability to manipulate materials in the same way humans can, the development of complex technology becomes much harder. Hands are another important factor. Human hands are uniquely suited for precise manipulation. The opposable thumb allows a strong and flexible grip, making it possible to shape tools, tie knots, and perform delicate tasks. While some animals have grasping appendages, few match the combination of strength, precision, and control found in human hands. This physical ability supports technological development, which in turn supports further intellectual growth. Another key difference lies in the structure of human social life. Humans form long-lasting pair bonds, extended families, and communities that include individuals of many ages. Children are cared for over many years, allowing extended learning and skill development. This long childhood provides time to acquire complex knowledge that would be difficult to learn quickly. In many other species, young individuals must become independent much sooner, limiting the amount of learning that can take place. Memory and imagination also contribute to the difference. Many animals remember past events, but humans developed the ability to imagine detailed futures. Planning not just for tomorrow but for seasons or years ahead became common. This long-term planning supports agriculture, construction, and social organization. Imagination also allows humans to conceive of things that do not yet exist. New tools, new strategies, new ways of organizing society. Another factor is the human capacity for symbolic thought. Symbols allow complex ideas to be represented in simple forms. Words, gestures, and eventually written characters can carry meanings that are understood by many people. This ability to use symbols expands communication enormously. Other animals communicate, sometimes in sophisticated ways, but their communication systems are generally limited in the range of abstract ideas they can convey. Symbolic communication allows humans to share detailed instructions, record knowledge, and build complex cultural systems. It's also important to consider the role of culture. In human societies, culture accumulates. Techniques, beliefs, and knowledge are preserved and passed on. Each generation inherits not only genes, but also tools, language, and traditions. In many animal species, behaviors are learned, but the accumulation of cultural knowledge is limited. Innovations may appear, but they often disappear if not maintained. Humans developed systems, teaching, storytelling, writing, that preserved and expanded cultural knowledge over long periods. Environmental adaptability is another important difference. Humans spread across a wide range of climates, from tropical forests to Arctic tundra. This adaptability was supported by tools, clothing, shelter, and cooperation. Other intelligent species are often more specialized, adapted to specific environments where they thrive, but beyond which survival becomes difficult. Specialization can be highly effective in stable conditions, but it can limit expansion when environments change. Humans, as generalists, were able to survive in many different conditions, giving them a broader range. Energy use also played a role. Cooking, as we discussed earlier, allowed humans to extract more calories from food, supporting larger brains and more complex activities. Many other intelligent animals rely on raw diets that limit the amount of energy available for brain development. Energy is the foundation of all biological processes, and access to more usable energy supports greater complexity. Another aspect worth considering is the human tendency to modify environments deliberately. Beavers build dams, and some animals alter their surroundings in limited ways, but humans began reshaping entire landscapes. Agriculture, domestication, and construction allowed humans to control resources more effectively and reduce the impact of natural fluctuations. This control increased population stability and growth. Population size itself influences dominance. Larger populations produce more ideas, more innovations, and more resilience in the face of challenges. Humans, supported by agriculture and cooperation, were able to increase their numbers far beyond those of most large animals. Numbers alone do not guarantee dominance, but they amplify the effects of other advantages. There is also a psychological dimension to consider. Humans are highly motivated by curiosity. We explore not only to find food or shelter, but to understand. This drive to explore leads to discoveries, new lands, new techniques, new ideas. Curiosity encourages experimentation, and experimentation leads to innovation. Other intelligent animals are curious as well, but the combination of curiosity with teaching, communication, and cumulative culture creates a powerful engine of change. It is important, however, not to see this story as one of superiority in a simple sense. Other species are extraordinarily well adapted to their environments. A dolphin navigating the ocean, an eagle soaring on thermal currents, or a cheetah sprinting across the savannah possesses abilities far beyond human physical limits. Human dominance is not the result of being the fastest or strongest, or even the most individually intelligent. It is the result of a unique combination of traits working together. Language, cooperation, cumulative culture, symbolic thought, technological skill, and long-term planning formed a network of abilities that reinforced one another. This network allowed humans to overcome individual limitations. Another subtle but important difference lies in flexibility of behaviour. Humans can change strategies quickly when circumstances change. A new tool can be invented, a new food source explored, a new method of cooperation developed. This flexibility allows rapid adaptation to new challenges. Many species rely more heavily on inherited behaviours that change slowly over evolutionary time. Flexibility provides an advantage in a changing world. Over thousands of years, these advantages accumulated. Human populations expanded, technologies improved, societies grew more complex. The influence of humans on ecosystems increased. Other intelligent species continued to thrive in their own niches, but none developed the same combination of traits that allowed humans to reshape the planet on a global scale. It is fascinating to reflect on how narrow this path may have been. If language had not developed as it did, if cooperation had remained limited to small groups, if cooking had not increased energy availability, the story might have been very different. Human dominance was not inevitable. It was the result of many small developments aligning over long periods. There is a moment in childhood that many people remember, although it rarely seems important at the time. A child picks up a stick and suddenly it is not just a stick anymore. It becomes a sword, or a fishing rod, or the mast of a ship sailing across an imaginary ocean. Nothing in the physical world has changed, yet in the mind, an entirely new world has appeared. That simple act of imagination reflects one of the most powerful abilities humans possess. It is the capacity to think about things that are not present, to picture situations that have never happened, and to share those visions with others. This ability, more than strength or speed, or even intelligence alone, may have been the true turning point that allowed humans to dominate the Earth. Other animals can solve problems and remember past events. Some can even anticipate immediate outcomes. But humans develop the ability to construct detailed mental worlds, to imagine future scenarios, to create plans that extend far beyond the present moment. Planning is, in many ways, applied imagination. Imagine a group of early humans preparing for a hunt. They do not simply react to the sight of prey. They discuss strategies, picture the terrain, anticipate how animals might move, and assign roles in advance. They are not only responding to reality, they are shaping it in their minds before it happens. This capacity for shared imagination allows coordinated action on a scale that would otherwise be impossible. Language played a crucial role in this development. Words allow ideas to be transmitted from one mind to another. But imagination gives those words their power. When someone describes a place, a plan, or a story, listeners can picture it in their own minds. In this way, imagination becomes collective. A single individual can imagine, but a group can imagine together. And when a group shares the same vision, they can act in ways that transform the world around them. This shared imagination is at the heart of many human achievements. A village is built because people imagine a place where they can live together safely. A field is planted because farmers imagine the harvest months in advance. A shelter is constructed because someone envisions protection from weather that has not yet arrived. Each of these actions begins as a thought about the future. Another powerful effect of imagination is the ability to create systems of belief and identity. Earlier, we considered how stories and myths helped bind groups together. These narratives often describe things that cannot be seen directly: ancestors, spirits, or abstract ideas about fairness and duty. Whether or not these beliefs correspond to physical reality, they influence behaviour in very real ways. People cooperate, follow rules, and make sacrifices for ideas that exist primarily in the mind. This is an extraordinary capability. It allows humans to organise societies around concepts rather than just immediate needs. Laws, currencies, institutions, and nations all depend on shared imagination. They exist because large numbers of people believe in them and act accordingly. Other animals form groups, but their cooperation is based on immediate relationships and instincts. Humans, by contrast, can cooperate with strangers because they share common beliefs or goals. This expansion of cooperation was a decisive advantage. Imagination also drives innovation. To invent a new tool or technique, one must first picture it. The mind experiments before the hands begin to work. This mental rehearsal saves time and reduces risk. A toolmaker imagines how a stone will break before striking it. A builder imagines the structure of a shelter before gathering materials. A navigator imagines the path of a journey before setting out. The ability to simulate possibilities in the mind allows humans to solve problems more efficiently. There is also a connection between imagination and memory. When people recall past experiences, they reconstruct them in the mind. This process uses many of the same mental systems as imagining the future. In a sense, humans are constantly travelling through time in their thoughts, remembering what has been and anticipating what might be. This mental flexibility allows learning to be applied in new situations. A mistake made once can be avoided in the future because the mind can rehearse different outcomes. Another aspect of imagination is creativity. Creativity is not limited to art or music. It appears in toolmaking, farming techniques, social organisation, and countless other areas. When people imagine alternatives to the way things are, they open the door to change. Creativity allows adaptation to new environments, new challenges, and new opportunities. Over thousands of years, this creative capacity accelerated the pace of human cultural evolution. New ideas spread, were tested, refined, and sometimes replaced by better ones. This process of continuous innovation became one of the defining features of our species. Imagination also plays a role in empathy. To understand another person's feelings, one must imagine their experience. This ability strengthens social bonds and encourages cooperation. Groups in which individuals understand and support one another are more stable and more resilient. Another subtle effect of imagination is motivation. When people picture a desired future, a successful harvest, a safe settlement, a prosperous community, they are more willing to work toward it. The imagined outcome provides direction and purpose. Purpose guides effort over long periods, even when immediate rewards are small. This long-term motivation is essential for projects that take years or generations to complete. Building irrigation systems, constructing large structures, or developing new forms of agriculture. Imagination, therefore, is not just a mental exercise, it is a driving force behind sustained action. It is interesting to consider how this ability may have evolved. Early humans who could anticipate dangers, plan routes, and imagine solutions would have had a survival advantage. Over time, natural selection may have favoured individuals with greater cognitive flexibility and imagination. As brains became larger and social structures more complex, imagination became increasingly important. The development of art provides another glimpse into the human imagination. Cave paintings, carvings, and ornaments created tens of thousands of years ago show animals, symbols, and patterns that reflect not just observation but interpretation. These images suggest that early humans were not only seeing the world but representing it, reshaping it in their minds and expressing those visions through creative work. Art, in this sense, is a record of imagination made visible. Another powerful example of shared imagination is the creation of calendars and timekeeping systems. These systems allow people to coordinate activities over long periods, planting, harvesting, trading, and travelling according to agreed schedules. A calendar exists because people imagine time in structured ways and agree to follow that structure. This shared framework allows societies to function more efficiently. Imagination also influences technology. Every invention begins as an idea. Before a wheel was built, someone imagined rolling objects more easily. Before a plough was constructed, someone imagined turning the soil more effectively. Each technological advance represents a successful translation of imagination into reality. And as technologies accumulate, they expand the range of what can be imagined next. There is also an important connection between imagination and storytelling. Stories allow people to explore possibilities safely, to consider different choices and outcomes without experiencing the risks directly. A story about a dangerous journey can teach caution. A story about cooperation can inspire unity. Stories allow lessons to be learned through imagination, rather than trial and error alone. This makes storytelling a powerful educational tool. Over time, the human capacity for imagination enabled the creation of increasingly complex societies. Laws, institutions, and systems of governance are all products of shared ideas. They exist because people agree to act as if they are real. This agreement allows large groups to cooperate and organize effectively. It is remarkable to think that much of the modern world, cities, economies, and global networks depends on collective imagination. The value of money, the authority of laws, and the identity of nations are all sustained by shared belief. This ability to create and maintain shared realities is one of the defining traits of our species. Another aspect worth considering is how imagination shapes the future. Humans do not simply accept the world as it is. They constantly think about how it could be different, how problems might be solved, how lives might be improved. This forward-looking mindset drives progress. It also carries risks. Not every imagined idea leads to positive outcomes. Some innovations bring unintended consequences, but the capacity to imagine alternatives remains a powerful force. Over tens of thousands of years, this ability to imagine and then act collectively on those imaginings allowed humans to transform landscapes, domesticate plants and animals, build cities, and develop technologies that reshape the planet. Dominance, in this sense, was not the result of a single invention or discovery. It was the result of a unique mental capacity combined with cooperation, language, and cumulative knowledge. The ability to imagine worlds that did not yet exist, and then work together to make them real, may have been the true turning point in the human story. And as this capacity continued to grow, it carried humanity into an era where the influence of our species would extend far beyond local environments, eventually reaching every corner of the globe. Looking ahead is something humans have always done, even when the future was only a few days away, and the main concern was whether the next hunt would succeed or whether the weather would hold. That habit of looking forward, of trying to picture what might come next, has remained with us through every stage of our history. It guided early farmers planting seeds months before harvest, navigators setting sail toward lands they could not yet see, and builders laying foundations for structures that would not be finished within their own lifetimes. Now the scale of that forward thinking has grown larger than ever before, because the reach of human influence has grown larger than ever before. There was a time when a small group of people could affect only the valley or forest where they lived. Their fires, their tools, their shelters, and their hunting changed the landscape in modest ways, often temporary ones. But as populations increased, technologies advanced, and societies became more organized, the effects of human activity began to spread farther. Fields replaced forests, rivers were redirected, animals were bred and transported far from their original habitats. Cities expanded across plains and coastlines. Roads, ships, and later railways and aircraft connected distant regions. Today, the scale of human influence is global. The atmosphere itself carries the traces of our actions. Oceans bear the marks of fishing, shipping, and changing temperatures. Even remote regions, deserts, polar ice, deep forests, are affected by decisions made thousands of kilometers away. This situation is unique in the history of life on Earth. Never before has a single species shaped the planet so extensively, so rapidly, and so deliberately. That realization brings both a sense of achievement and a sense of responsibility. It is easy to focus on the achievements. Humans have developed medicine that prevents or cures diseases that once claimed millions of lives. We have built systems that allow food to be transported across continents, reducing the risk of famine in many regions. Communication networks connect people instantly across the globe. Knowledge that once took lifetimes to gather can now be accessed in moments. These developments have improved the quality of life for many people in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few centuries ago. At the same time, there are challenges that come with such power. Changing landscapes can disrupt ecosystems that took thousands of years to develop. Extracting resources can deplete them faster than they can be replaced. Pollution can accumulate in air, water, and soil. Climate patterns influenced by human activity can shift in ways that affect agriculture, weather, and sea levels. These challenges are complex, and they do not have simple solutions, yet the same qualities that allowed humans to dominate the planet — cooperation, communication, planning, and imagination — also provide the tools needed to address these problems. Consider how knowledge is shared today. Scientists in different countries collaborate, sharing data and ideas. Engineers design technologies to produce energy more efficiently or to reduce waste. Farmers experiment with new methods to improve soil health and crop yields. Communities develop systems to manage resources more sustainably. These efforts are not always perfect or evenly distributed, but they demonstrate something important: the ability of humans to recognize problems and work collectively towards solutions. That ability has been present throughout our history. When early humans faced a changing climate, they adapted. When food became scarce, they developed new tools or strategies. When settlements grew too large for memory alone to manage, they invented writing. Each challenge prompted innovation. The challenges of the present may be larger in scale, but the underlying process remains the same. Another aspect of the future worth considering is technology. Technology has always been an extension of human capability. A stone blade extended the cutting power of the hand. A plough extended the strength of muscles. A ship extended the distance humans could travel. Today, computers extend memory and calculation. Satellites extend observation. Machines perform tasks that once required enormous physical effort. As technology advances, the pace of change often accelerates. New tools allow new discoveries, which lead to new tools in turn. This process can feel overwhelming at times, but it also reflects the same pattern seen throughout human history: cumulative knowledge building step by step. One interesting question about the future is how technology will continue to shape human life. Some developments may make daily tasks easier, reducing the need for physical labour. Others may change how people communicate, learn, and work. Education, for example, has already been transformed by access to vast amounts of information. A student today can learn about subjects that once required access to rare books or distant universities. Medicine continues to advance as well. Treatments improve. Diagnostic tools become more precise. Understanding of the human body deepens. These changes influence not only how long people live, but how they live. There is also the possibility of humans expanding beyond Earth. For most of history, the idea of travelling to other worlds existed only in imagination and stories. But in recent decades, spacecraft have explored the Moon, Mars, and other parts of the solar system. Telescopes have revealed planets orbiting distant stars. Whether large-scale human settlement beyond Earth will occur remains uncertain, but the possibility itself reflects the extraordinary reach of human curiosity and engineering. If such expansion happens, it will present new challenges, maintaining life in harsh environments, managing resources carefully, and ensuring cooperation among people living far from the planet where our species evolved. In many ways, these challenges will resemble those faced by early humans, moving into unfamiliar landscapes, requiring adaptability, planning, and cooperation. Another important factor shaping the future is population. The number of humans on Earth has increased dramatically over the past few centuries, supported by agriculture, medicine, and industry. In some regions, populations continue to grow rapidly. In others, growth has slowed or even declined. Population changes influence resource use, economic systems, and environmental impact. Managing these changes requires careful planning and cooperation at local, national, and global levels. It also requires an understanding of how interconnected the world has become. A drought in one region can affect food prices in another. A technological innovation in one country can influence industries worldwide. Diseases can spread rapidly in an era of global travel, but so can information and medical assistance. Interconnection is one of the defining features of the modern world. An interconnection increases both vulnerability and resilience. Problems can spread more quickly, but solutions can spread quickly as well. Another dimension of the future involves culture and identity. Human societies are diverse, shaped by different histories, languages, and traditions. This diversity can be a source of creativity and strength, bringing together different perspectives and ideas. It can also create challenges when values or interests conflict. Learning to cooperate across cultural and national boundaries is one of the central tasks of the modern era. The ability to see beyond immediate differences and recognize shared goals, health, stability, opportunity, and the well-being of future generations may determine how successfully humanity navigates the coming centuries. There is also a more personal aspect to the future that is easy to overlook. Every large change in history has been experienced not only as a global event, but as countless individual lives unfolding day by day. People wake, work, eat, talk, learn, and rest much as their ancestors did, even as the world around them changes. The rhythm of daily life continues. Children grow up, learning about the world, forming friendships, imagining their own futures. Families gather for meals. Conversations take place in quiet rooms and busy streets. These small moments are the threads that make up the larger fabric of history. When we think about the future of humanity, it is easy to focus on grand trends, technology, climate, economics, exploration, but the future will also be shaped by ordinary choices made by ordinary people, how resources are used, how communities are built, how knowledge is shared. History has always been shaped in this way. Another factor that will influence the future is education. Knowledge accumulates when it is taught effectively. A society that invests in education increases its capacity to solve problems, innovate, and adapt. Education does not only involve formal schooling, it includes the transmission of skills, values, and critical thinking. The ability to evaluate information, to question assumptions, and to understand complex systems becomes increasingly important in a world where decisions can have far-reaching consequences. Curiosity, the same quality that led early humans to approach fire or experiment with tools, remains essential. It drives scientific research, exploration, and creative work. There is also the question of balance. Throughout history, humans have sought to balance immediate needs with long-term sustainability. Farmers must harvest crops without exhausting the soil. Communities must use water without depleting rivers or aquifers. Industries must produce goods without damaging the environments on which they depend. Finding this balance is not always easy, but it is necessary for stability. The concept of stewardship, Caring for the land and resources that support life has appeared in many cultures. In the modern era, this idea takes on global significance. The Earth is not only a place where humans live, it is a complex system of ecosystems, climates, and life forms that interact in intricate ways. Understanding these systems is one of the great scientific achievements of recent centuries, and applying that understanding wisely may be one of the greatest challenges of the future. It is worth remembering that the story of human dominance is not only about power, it is also about responsibility. A species capable of reshaping landscapes, altering climates, and influencing the survival of other species must also consider the consequences of its actions. This awareness is growing, reflected in efforts to protect habitats, reduce pollution, and develop sustainable technologies. Progress in these areas is uneven and sometimes slow, but the recognition of responsibility itself is an important step. Looking further ahead, it is difficult to predict exactly what human societies will look like in hundreds or thousands of years. History shows that change is constant, often in ways that are difficult to foresee. Technologies that seem essential today may become obsolete. New challenges may arise that we cannot yet imagine. New discoveries may open possibilities that transform daily life. What seems certain is that the qualities that have carried humans this far, cooperation, communication, imagination, and adaptability, will continue to play a central role. Those qualities have allowed our species to survive ice ages, cross oceans, build civilizations, and explore beyond our planet. They will likely shape whatever comes next. And as the long arc of human history continues, each generation becomes part of the same unfolding story. A story that began with small groups of people moving carefully through unfamiliar landscapes, learning, adapting, and imagining. That story has not reached an ending. It is still being written, quietly, day by day, in choices made by individuals and communities around the world. And somewhere, even now, someone is looking ahead, imagining possibilities that have not yet taken shape, beginning the next small step in a journey that is still continuing.